Chapter 2048. The Halberd of 10,000 Peaks? So this thing is in the family way? Chu Luiyue was also surprised to hear the continuous exclamations. He looked up at Rongxiu. Didn't they say that the Halberd of 10,000 Peaks has been missing for thousands of years? Rongxiu narrowed his eyes. The family way has never revealed this information before. This thing, it's very likely that they just got it not long ago. Why do you think so? Chu Luiyue's brows twitched. Maybe they got it long ago but they hid it very well? Rongxiu's lips curled into a half-smile. Wei Zhe isn't someone who can keep his cool. Although the family Wei was also a first-class aristocratic family, it was still slightly inferior to the Yuntian Tower that Rongxiu was in. In the world of divine ruins, it was an extremely honorable thing for any aristocratic family to have a divine artifact. If the family Wei had it long ago, they would have announced it to the world. If I'm not wrong, they got the Halberd of 10,000 Peaks after knowing about the existence of Tang Ke's tomb. Wei Zhe deliberately suppressed the news and waited for today. Meeting Chu Luiyue's confused gaze, Rongxiu chuckled and explained. The Halberd of 10,000 Peaks is the divine artifact that Tang Ke refined back then. With Tang Ke's divine artifact, there might be a chance of success in opening the door to her tomb. At that very moment, everyone present was thinking the same thing. When they saw Wei Zhe take out the Halberd of 10,000 Peaks, they immediately understood something. Their expressions immediately changed. Wei Zhe, when did you get the Halberd of 10,000 Peaks? Wei Zhe narrowed his eyes. I don't think I need to tell you this, right? Who doesn't know that the Halberd of 10,000 Peaks is one of the 5 divine artifacts that Tang Ke refined back then? With this item, it would be easy for you to open Tang Ke's tomb. Why go through so much trouble to find us? Wei Zhe, what are you planning? Wei Zhe chuckled. Everyone has really misunderstood me. I have no enmity with any of you, so why would I harm you? In fact, I did want to use this thing to try to open Tang Ke's tomb, but before I could do it, the news had already spread. Helplessly, this idea could only be put aside for the time being and wait for everyone to come together before trying again. Sheng Guanjing suddenly said, if that's the case, why didn't you say anything at the beginning? Why did you only speak after so many people had died? This was also what the others were most concerned about. If Wei Zhe had taken it out earlier, those people wouldn't have had to die. Wei Zhe smiled bitterly. Senior Shangguan, I didn't expect this place to be so dangerous. Originally, I thought that since we are all peak existences in the Divine Ruins world, we would definitely have a solution. Besides, if I had spoken at that time, then, it would probably have attracted discussion, right? In other words, he was doing this for the sake of fairness. Otherwise, everyone would be here and he would be the first to do so. It would seem like he was deliberately snatching it. Only now that no one dared to rashly step forward, it was the most appropriate time for him to make a move. Everyone was speechless. Sheng Guanjing frowned. Wei Zhe's words and actions seemed to be understandable. However, if he did this, those people who had died earlier would be wronged. However, everyone was in a competitive relationship. Speaking of which, Wei Zhe didn't have the obligation or responsibility to be responsible for the lives of others. It was fine to say that he was selfish, but no one was in the position to criticize him. This Wei Zhe, he was really scheming. Wei Zhe sneered in his heart, then retracted his gaze and clenched the 1,000 Peaks halberd in his hand. This was his family Wei's territory. Tang Ke's tomb should be theirs. These people came from all over to fight for it, yet they still had the nerve to say so much? Did they really think that his family Wei was easy to bully? Fortunately, he was lucky enough to obtain this 1,000 Peaks halberd. With this, his chances of opening Tang Ke's tomb would be greatly increased. Thinking of this, Wei Zhe felt a wave of excitement in his heart. He was also a weapon refiner, so he was naturally curious and yearning for Tang Ke's tomb. As long as he could enter, he might be able to obtain the treasures or inheritance left behind by Tang Ke. Wei Zhe's heart was burning. He couldn't help but lick his lips, transfer the force in his body, and pour it all into the 1,000 Peaks halberd. Then, he held the 1,000 Peaks halberd tightly in one hand and stabbed forward. Buzz! A strange buzzing sound suddenly came from the huge blood-red stone. Immediately after, the bronze door ring moved without any wind, as if an invisible hand had pulled it up and buckled it gently. Knock knock. A crisp knocking sound came from the door. Everyone was shocked. Moved. This is really a door. Wei Zhe's eyes were fixed on it. His heart was beating violently, and the blood in his body seemed to be boiling. The sky quickly darkened. Dark clouds gathered and the wind whistled. Tianlei, like silver snakes, appeared one after another, shuttling back and forth in the clouds. The momentum was great. The movement was astonishing. Sheng Wanjing raised his eyes to take a look. A sacred artifact is indeed extraordinary. A casual movement can trigger such a magnificent scene. Even if he wanted to refine a venerable artifact, he might not be able to trigger so many Tianlei in such a short time. The Thousand Peaks halberd, one of the 10 great sacred artifacts, was indeed worthy of its reputation. Rumble. A Tianlei fell with a loud bang. It went straight for Wei Zhe. The dazzling light almost made people unable to open their eyes. Some of the weaker ones couldn't withstand the pressure and unconsciously took a few steps back. However, most of the people present still insisted on not moving a single step. If Tang Ke's tomb was really opened, even if they couldn't get first place, they had to try their best to run in front. Boom. The Tianlei struck the Thousand Peaks halberd in Wei Zhe's hand. However, the moment the imposing Tianlei fell on the Thousand Peaks halberd, it was instantly devoured. An inch-long silver-white pattern appeared. Wei Zhe was the closest to it, so he saw it the clearest. For a moment he was shocked and amazed. As expected of one of the 10 great sacred artifacts, such a terrifying Tianlei force was completely devoured in the blink of an eye. It contained so much energy, but in the end only one pattern was awakened. If the Thousand Peaks halberd was completely awakened, how awe-inspiring would that be? In fact, this was the first time Wei Zhe officially made a move after obtaining the Thousand Peaks halberd. Therefore even he himself was shocked. After a short moment of shock, his heart was filled with endless excitement and joy. With such a treasure in hand, Tang Ke's tomb would definitely open. Then several more Tianlei fell one after another. The aura on the Thousand Peaks halberd became more and more powerful. The bronze doorknob kept swaying, and the buzzing sound coming from inside seemed to be getting clearer and clearer. Finally, the last Tianlei was also devoured by the Thousand Peaks halberd. The last dark pattern on the halberd lit up. Wei Zhe took a deep breath and stabbed forward fiercely. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 2049. Clang. An ear-piercing sound of sharp weapons colliding was heard. Everyone held their breaths as they stared intently at the screen. However, Wei Zhe's expression changed from complacency to shock and confusion. Finally, it was filled with disbelief. In front of him, Wan Feng's halberd was pressed against the blood-red stone, but it did not budge at all. He widened his eyes in shock and could not believe what he was seeing. Then he exerted force again and stabbed forward. But nothing changed. There wasn't even the slightest mark left on the rock. This so-called door had no intention of opening at all. Because he exerted force, a dull pain came from his perlicue. However, Wei Zhe had no time to care about it. How could this be? How could this be? The power on Wan Feng's halberd had been completely awakened, and the strange stone in front of him was still buzzing. But it just could not be opened. Family Wei, what's going on? At this moment, the surrounding people also noticed that something was wrong. They looked at each other with puzzled and suspicious expressions. Wei Zhe was embarrassed. He tried to retrieve Wan Feng's halberd, but there was not a single mark on it. However, that voice did not disappear. Even the bronze door knocker was still clinging to the door. Seeing all this, Wei Zhe's heart sank and his face turned green and white. He thought that this movement was caused by him, but in the end, it was not. And the surrounding people, seeing this scene, how could they not understand? What's going on? Isn't Wan Feng's halberd a sacred weapon refined by Tang Ke? Why can't it be opened? This thing can't be fake, right? Looking at the movement just now, this thing must be real. It's also true that it can't open this door. After all this time, it turns out that this method won't work? Family Wei really worked for nothing. The crowd discussed in low voices. All kinds of words reached Wei Zhe's ears, and his heart was in turmoil. His temples were throbbing like a ball of fire that was about to burst out from his chest. Ridicule. Ridicule. Contempt. Those gazes made him feel as if there were daggers at his back. His entire body stiffened as he stood rooted to the ground. His mind was completely blank and in complete chaos. Clearly, everything was progressing smoothly. How could it be, if even the sacred weapon that Tang Ke had refined herself could not open the tomb, then, who else in this world and what else could do it? That's not right. Sheng Wanjing frowned and stared ahead, muttering softly. The few people around him looked over. What's wrong? Sheng Wanjing raised his chin. Wei Zhe didn't move, but the movement on the rock didn't stop. With his reminder, the others were also stunned. Taking a closer look, he realized that this was indeed the case. Perhaps Tang Ke's tomb has sensed the existence of the 10,000 Peaks halberd and caused this commotion. But even with Wei Zhe's own strength, he still couldn't open it? Someone guessed. Shangguan Jing said nothing. He still felt that something was wrong. His suspicions gradually increased when he saw the scene before him. If the 10,000 Peaks halberd could trigger these senses, why couldn't it open? Family Wei, could it be that your strength isn't enough and that's why you couldn't open it? Someone in the crowd finally raised his voice and asked. These words were a little unpleasant to hear. They were just short of directly saying that it was because Wei Zhe was incompetent. But Wei Zhe couldn't refute it now. He suddenly sneered, turned to look at the person who spoke, and handed over the 10,000 Peaks halberd in his hand. If you have the confidence, why don't you give it a try yourself? Everyone was shocked. They didn't expect him to have such a reaction. That person was stunned for a moment and then snorted. Family Wei, you really like to joke. This 10,000 Peaks halberd is a sacred weapon. Once it recognizes a master, it can't be used anymore. Are you saying this on purpose to embarrass? This 10,000 Peaks halberd hasn't recognized a master yet. Wei Zhe's words immediately caused the scene to fall into dead silence. At this moment, all the sounds of discussion and clamor completely disappeared. Countless pairs of eyes looked at him in shock, as if doubting the authenticity of his words. Wei Zhe sneered. At this time, I, Wei Zhe, have no need to lie. If anyone doesn't believe me, you can come forward and try it yourself. Since everyone thinks that I, Wei Zhe, am not capable enough, then I'll just hand over this thing. Whoever can use this 10,000 Peaks halberd to open Tang Ke's tomb, I'll say, impressed. As long as anyone has the ability to make the 10,000 Peaks halberd recognize a master and obtain all the items in Tang Ke's tomb, I, Wei Zhe, will have no objections. As he spoke, he flung his wrist and actually threw the thing forward. The 10,000 Peaks halberd floated quietly in the air. Countless dazzling streams of light refined by Tianlei were still flickering on the halberd, giving it an imposing aura. Many people looked at each other. Such a temptation could be said to be great. But Wei Zhe was Family Wei's Family Wei after all. He was the king of equipment refinement and a god. With such strength, he could definitely be considered one of the best among these people. If even Wei Zhe couldn't do it, then how many people present could give it a try? Even the person who had mocked him earlier was somewhat hesitant. His strength was similar to Wei Zhe's. If he also couldn't do it now, then wouldn't it be embarrassing? Wei Zhe looked around and sneered in his heart. He was standing closest to them, so he knew best that the commotion inside was not caused by the 10,000 Peaks halberd. It would be the same no matter who came. This is a little interesting. I'm willing to give it a try. Chapter 2050. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice. The person who spoke was Shangguan Jing. Wei Zhe sneered. Senior Shangguan, have you made up your mind? Didn't you say just now that you're here to join in the fun? Shangguan Jing said with a smile. What's there to hesitate about? Since the leader of the Family Wei is willing to offer the long halberd of Wanfeng, why can't we give it a try? Besides, I'm indeed here to join in the fun, but it seems that everyone doesn't seem to be willing to move. In that case, I can only do it myself. We can't just stand here and watch, can we? Wei Zhe was rendered speechless by his words. If that's the case, then, please? With that, he took a few steps back. It seemed that he was really going to watch from the sidelines. Shangguan Jing wasn't afraid of embarrassing himself, so what was there to worry about? Shangguan, are you really going to go over? The people next to him wanted to dissuade him, but Shangguan Jing shook his head with a smile. What's the big deal? Although the leader of the Family Wei failed, he's still fine, isn't he? Since there's no loss, why not give it a try? Seeing that Shangguan Jing had made up his mind, the rest of the people stopped trying to dissuade him. Then, be careful. Shangguan Jing still had a smile on his face as he strode forward. At this moment, all eyes were focused on him. Shangguan Jing came to the middle, raised his hand and took the long halberd of Wanfeng in his hand. He first waited for a while, then injected some of his power into it and raised his eyebrows. As expected, this thing is still ownerless. Only in this way would he be able to channel his power into Wei Zhe's body after he had used it. However, without an owner, the power that this thing could exert was extremely small. Hearing Shangguan Jing's words, many people were even more shaken. Sacred artifacts were extremely intelligent, and they would always choose their own masters. Without that opportunity, it would be useless even if one held onto it for 10 or 100 years. In his hands, he couldn't display the true power of the holy artifact at all. No wonder Wei Zhe was so assured to let it out. However, judging from the current situation, the 1,000 Peaks halberd didn't seem to recognize Shangguan Jing as its master. Wei Zhe closed his eyes and his tense heart relaxed a little. It was impossible for him not to be nervous. Ever since he had obtained the 10,000 Peaks halberd, he hadn't been acknowledged and he felt vexed. It was like guarding a mountain of gold, but not being able to spend a single cent. This feeling was truly unbearable. Just now he had thrown out the myriad Peaks halberd in a fit of anger. Now that he had calmed down he felt some regret. Now he could only hope that these people would not be recognized by the 1,000 Peaks halberd. Sheng Guanjing sized up Wanfeng's halberd for a while before he took it in his hand. He looked up with a solemn expression, and at the same time, he began to mobilize the energy in his body. Then he suddenly thrust it forward. Clang! The crisp sound of a collision rang out again. Everything in front of him was still motionless. His reaction was exactly the same as when Wei Zhe made his move. Sheng Guanjing frowned and stopped without hesitation. At this moment he also realized that something was wrong. The commotion inside was not caused by Wanfeng's halberd. Under such circumstances, no matter what, it couldn't be opened. Wei Zhe crossed his arms and laughed. Senior Shengguan, how do you feel after trying it yourself? I think, it doesn't seem to be any different from what I did just now, right? Sheng Guanjing didn't care about his mockery. It would be strange if Tang Ke's tomb was really so easy to open. Moreover, the key to opening the door was clearly not the 10,000 Peaks halberd. What else was there to say? This 10,000 Peaks halberd is not the key to opening Tang Ke's tomb. Sheng Guanjing threw the 10,000 Peaks halberd casually and said. Wei Zhe didn't expect him to reveal the secret so straightforwardly, and he was a little angry for a moment. However, after thinking about it carefully, this matter couldn't be hidden, and there was nothing to mind. He took a deep breath and calmed his emotions. Senior Shengguan, what do you mean? Someone asked. This 10,000 Peaks halberd was refined by Tang Ke personally back then. How can it be useless? If it can't even do this, then they really had no choice. Sheng Guanjing focused his eyes and looked at the bronze doorknob again. This was actually the most strange thing about him. Suddenly his heart skipped a beat. He vaguely felt that the patterns on the bronze doorknob seemed to be somewhat familiar. It seemed like he had seen it somewhere before. He took a step forward. A ball of red flames appeared again. In an instant it was about to surround Sheng Guanjing. Be careful. No one expected Sheng Guanjing to suddenly step forward. He had clearly learned his lesson previously. Once he approached rashly he would definitely be attacked. Sheng Guanjing reacted extremely quickly. This time, he clearly saw that the flames were surging out from the bronze doorknob. His expression turned stern, and he immediately set up a barrier around his body. However, at the same time, the force in his body seemed to be affected by the flames, and it surged rapidly as if it was boiling. The scorching temperature quickly invaded his body. Poof! A ball of red flames suddenly burst out from his left shoulder. Sheng Guanjing thought to himself, oh no! This is a sign that I'm about to explode and die. However, at this moment, a crimson golden flame suddenly flew over and surrounded him. Those red flames were devoured in the blink of an eye. Pooh! Everyone heard the commotion and immediately turned to look. Then he saw a slender and exquisite figure approaching at high speed. Chu Luiyue grabbed Taizu's arm and was about to retreat. Suddenly the bronze doorknob shone brightly. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 2051. Taizu immediately recognized Chu Luiyue and exclaimed in surprise. Before he could finish his sentence, he looked up and saw a flash of light behind her. Chu Luiyue also sensed that something was wrong and turned around to look. The rust on the bronze doorknob was peeling off quickly. A vast and sacred aura spread out from it. Suddenly her eyes narrowed and she gasped. As the light flashed, she could vaguely see that the patterns on the bronze door were very similar to the secret inscriptions on the armillary shield. The crimson flames around Sheng Guanjing had already faded away. The two figures appeared clearly in front of everyone. When the crowd saw this they were all shocked. Although Wei Zhe had never seen Chu Luiyue before, he immediately guessed her identity. Sheng Guanyu? Why is she here? Previously, everyone had gathered in the stone forest and entered together. How did she suddenly appear here? Since she was here then, where was Rongxiu? Family Wei, long time no see. How are you? A deep and pleasant voice sounded like the wind plucking the strings of a zither. Wei Zhe's heart sank when he heard the voice. He immediately turned around and saw a familiar figure in a snow-white robe. Rongxiu? Wei Zhe was angry and anxious. When did these people come in? Why didn't he notice them at all? The rest of the people present also reacted quickly. They kept looking at Rongxiu and Chu Luiyue. Most of them had seen Rongxiu before. Hence, most of their attention was placed on Chu Luiyue at this point. Sheng Guanyu? The one who defeated Yi Wentao in the Battle of Peach Blossom Dock? Someone murmured in disbelief. She looks like a high deity. Although she's a high deity, she helped Sheng Guanjing block the flames that gushed out of the bronze door knocker. That's right. She has contracted with the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan. These things are naturally of no threat to her. They were around just now? How did he get in? Everyone was talking about it. The appearance of Chu Luiyue and Rong Xiu was like a stone thrown into the water, causing countless ripples. However, at this moment Chu Luiyue did not pay attention to these movements. She furrowed her brows and stared at the bronze doorknob. She then reached out her hand without hesitation. You are danger. Sheng Guanjing was about to stop him when Chu Luiyue shook his head gently. Taizu, don't worry. I know what to do. Hearing her words, Sheng Guanjing froze in midair. He knew that she never did meaningless things. Since she came here, it meant that she must have her own purpose. Sheng Guanjing recalled that quite a few people had died here one after another and felt uneasy. However, the red fire was indeed suppressed by Chu Luiyue. Sheng Guanjing was very conflicted, but in the end he chose to believe her. He did not say anything else and just silently mobilized all the force in his body. If he found something wrong, he would immediately take action. The onlookers all looked over at this moment. When they saw Chu Luiyue's actions, many people looked at each other with a hint of mockery in their eyes. So many people failed just now. Did she think that she was different from others? Wei Zhe curled the corners of his mouth without a smile and said, Sheng Guanyu, that bronze door knocker is extremely dangerous. Many people have already died here. You're taking such a risk. If something happens later, don't blame me for not warning you. Chu Luiyue did not stop moving as if she did not hear him at all. Ignoring him in public was undoubtedly not giving Wei Zhe face. Wei Zhe's face was faintly green. Go, I will protect my princess. Rong Xiu spoke casually and interrupted Wei Zhe. His expression was languid and calm, but his tone was indisputable. Besides, you is now the master of Peach Blossom Dock. Speaking of which, she is on an equal footing with the master of Family Wei. Master of Family Wei, it's better to respectfully call her Master Yu, okay? Wei Zhe was so angry that the veins on his forehead throbbed. The Yu residence of Peach Blossom Dock has just been established, but my family Wei has been passed down for thousands of years. It is a first-class family in the world of God. How can they be compared? In other words, Chu Luiyue was not qualified to be compared with him at all. Rong Xiu smiled and gently stroked the tip of his eyebrows with his slender white fingers. I would like to ask, if the master of Family Wei is so powerful, who is stronger than Yi Wentao? Wei Zhe choked and the rest of his words were suddenly stuck in his throat. He could not say anything. What kind of existence was the family Yi? What kind of person was Yi Wentao? Ordinary people might not know, but people from first-class families like them knew best. Wei Zhe knew that if he were to fight with Yi Wentao, he would be the one to suffer a crushing defeat in the end. But Yi Wentao had lost in Peach Blossom Dock. His lips moved and his eyes unconsciously looked at the slender and exquisite figure not far away. Everyone in the area instantly quietened down. They had almost forgotten that the reason why the woman in front of them could become the master of Peach Blossom Dock was because she had defeated Yi Wentao. If even Yi Wentao was no match for her, then they... At this moment, Chu Luiyue's hand was less than an inch away from the bronze doorknob. Wei Zhe's heart felt like it was being squeezed tightly by something. Let them be arrogant for now. Later, when something happens, they will. As soon as this thought came to his mind, Wei Zhe widened his eyes in shock. Because Chu Luiyue had grabbed the bronze doorknob safely. Her slender fingers held the doorknob tightly. The glow from the doorknob made her skin look like jade. Everyone unconsciously held their breaths and looked at this scene in disbelief. Chu Luiyue's eyes were fixed in front of her. When she touched it, she could even clearly feel the patterns on it. She clearly did not recognize these runes, but for some reason she felt an inexplicable sense of familiarity at this moment. This feeling had actually started just now, and now it was even stronger and clearer. She pursed her lips. Standing here, she could hear the movements coming from inside more clearly. She was a little uncertain before, but now she could confirm that all the movements behind her were related to the 3 divine artifacts in her body. Tang Ku's Thousand Peaks halberd could not open it, but the divine artifacts left behind by Mr. Su could sense it strongly. Chu Luiyue no longer hesitated and gently pulled on the bronze doorknob. Knock knock. The next moment, white light enveloped them. The stone in front of them suddenly cracked and gradually revealed the appearance of a door. Chu Luiyue pulled again. Creak. The door slowly opened. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2052. Looking at the door that was slowly opening, everyone was shocked on the spot. It's open? In the deathly silent crowd, someone mumbled in disbelief. Wei Zhe closed his eyes tightly, afraid that he had seen something wrong. However, the scene in front of him didn't disappear. The door was still opening bit by bit. A white light shrouded it and no one could see what was behind the door. But it was indeed open. The door that was still motionless when so many people had died just now opened smoothly with a gentle knock from Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue immediately raised her leg and took a step forward. The next moment, her figure disappeared into the door. Rong Xiu's pace seemed neither fast nor slow, but in fact, his speed was extremely fast. As soon as he raised his hand, the halberd of 10,000 peaks, which was originally floating quietly in the air, flew over quickly. Then he came to Shangguan Jing's side. "Senior Shangguan, we should follow them." Rong Xiu chuckled. Shangguan Jing suddenly came back to his senses. "Yes, you had already gone in." He took a deep breath and walked forward. Rong Xiu followed behind the two of them. Yin Qing and Chang Wanzhou followed them like shadows. Just now, everyone's attention was on Chu Luiyue and Rong Xiu, and the two of them had always been good at hiding their figures and breaths, so they were like two transparent people from the beginning to the end. Until now, when they followed closely into the door, everyone was shocked to realize that the two of them didn't seem to be simple. When their figures disappeared one after another, the onlookers outside were still in deep shock. Wei Zhe was the first to react. The halberd of 10,000 peaks. That thing was taken away by Rong Xiu just now. That was a divine weapon. It was a treasure that he had obtained with great difficulty. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and chase after them." Wei Zhe shouted angrily and immediately rushed forward. In the blink of an eye, his figure also disappeared behind the door. Hearing this, the family Wei people woke up one after another. Seeing that Wei Zhe had already left, they couldn't care about anything else and hurriedly followed him. At this moment, the rest of the people present finally realized what was going on, and they all rushed towards the door in a rush. How could they not seize the opportunity to open Tang Ke's tomb after much difficulty? Whether they could get the inheritance and make further progress depended on today. Soon everyone present rushed in. The stone forest regained its silence again. Only the scattered corpses and the messy blood stains on the ground proved that everything that had happened here was real. After an unknown period of time, those corpses suddenly began to rot quickly. After about 15 minutes, only a set of corpses. The corpses, the corpses, the corpses, the corpses, and the corpses, the corpses, the corpses. Even the blood stains on the ground seemed to have been swallowed up by something and quickly disappeared. There was only a faint smell of blood left in the air. It was as if nothing had happened. The dazzling white light quickly dissipated, and the scene in front of him gradually became clear. This was a passageway that led downwards. The passageway was narrow and could only accommodate two people walking side by side. Pearls the size of a fist were hung on the walls on both sides of the room at regular intervals. The faint glow shone down as if it was daytime and everything was panoramic. At this moment, Chu Luiyue was standing at the front, her feet stepping on the first step. She looked down with the help of the light, but she couldn't see the end. It seemed to extend all the way down to the ground. Chu Luiyue raised her vigilance to the highest level and held the red cloud sword in her hand before going down. Shangguan Jing followed behind her. When he saw everything around him clearly, even he couldn't help but gasp in shock. The walls are carved from lapis lazuli jade. The so-called lapis lazuli jade was an extremely precious jade. Its texture was extremely hard and it was an excellent material for refining divine weapons. The success rate of refining with lapis lazuli jade was often much higher. Therefore, this lapis lazuli was highly valued and liked by weapon refiners. It was just that this thing was naturally produced and its quantity was limited, so it was very rare. This also made lapis lazuli jade even more difficult to find. Chu Luiyue could of course see that it was lapis lazuli jade. Among the venerable divine weapons that Taizu gave her, there was a short sword that was refined from this thing. Even a top-notch weapon refining venerable like the great ancestor only had such a small piece. But at this moment, the walls on both sides were made of lapis lazuli jade. It was no wonder that Taizu was so shocked. It seems that this is really Tang Ke's tomb. Other than him, who else in the world can do such a thing? Taizu let out a long sigh and then looked at the figure in front of him with a complicated and emotional gaze. So many people had tried before, but they had all failed. But this girl came and opened the door directly. Such a thing could only be explained by the word, opportunity. Although he knew that this girl had always been lucky, he was still shocked by these things that happened to her every time. This kind of luck was truly something that others could only be envious and jealous of. Familiar footsteps came from behind. It was Rong Xiao and the others. As Shang Guanjing walked, he couldn't help but ask, why are you here? When he said that he was coming here, she didn't seem to have any intention of coming. If he knew that they were coming, he would have brought them along. Chu Luiyue said softly, I didn't plan to come at first, but later I found out about some things, so I decided to come and take a look. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2053. What? Shang Guanjing was confused. Even Tang Ke's name couldn't move her. What else could it be that could make her come here? Chu Luiyue was silent for a moment and suddenly laughed. I wanted to see what exactly happened between Mr. Su and Senior Tang Ke back then. Shang Guanjing was stunned for a moment, and then he suddenly remembered that Chu Luiyue already had several holy weapons. And those were all Mr. Su's. Could it be that the movement just now? He suddenly had a guess in his heart. Previously, Wei Zhe and he had tried to open this door with the halberd of 10,000 peaks, but it was in vain. Because the movement behind the door was not caused by the halberd of 10,000 peaks. You said so. Chu Luiyue didn't say anything. But in Shang Guanjing's view, this reaction was a tacit admission. He opened his eyes slightly and for a moment he was a little confused. How could this be? Could it be that this was not Tang Ke's tomb but Mr. Su's? But the family Wei had always said that this was Tang Ke's tomb. If they hadn't gotten any evidence, they definitely wouldn't have been so sure. But now, Shang Guanjing frowned and didn't say anything. He just followed Chu Luiyue and kept walking down. What the truth was, perhaps they would know soon. Crack. A subtle sound suddenly came from behind. It seemed that something had broken, but it didn't seem like it. At the same time, there seemed to be a wave of power surging over. However, before it spread out, it had been suppressed. Sensing the movement, Chu Luiyue and Shang Guanjing looked back at the same time. What happened just now? Shang Guanjing asked curiously. He was very close, so he could clearly sense that the fluctuation came from Rong Xiao's body. Rong Xiao's thin lips curved up and he smiled. Nothing, it's just that the halberd of 10,000 peaks has just recognized its master. Shang Guanjing was shocked and lost his voice. What? Chu Luiyue was also a little surprised. Just now. Rong Xiao nodded and picked up the myriad peaks halberd. Even though the surroundings were bright and resplendent, one could still clearly see the streams of light above. They were extremely beautiful and extremely sharp. Originally, the process of a sacred artifact recognizing a master is somewhat troublesome. However, the 10,000 peaks halberd had already devoured a lot of Tianlei's power and was only one step away from completely awakening it. Therefore he saved a lot of time and energy. Chu Luiyue raised his eyebrows slightly. In that case, I really have to thank Family Wei properly. Rong Xiao also laughed. Of course. Shang Guanjing stood between the two of them and listened to them chatting casually while taking the long halberd of 10,000 peaks, one of the 10 great divine weapons. He was speechless for a while. Only in his mind, a voice was crazily shouting, a saint artifact. That was a saint artifact. It recognized him as its master just like that. Most importantly, it's such a big matter. Can't you two give a little more reaction? What do you want me to do like this? Chu Luiyue looked at Shang Guanjing. Seeing that his expression was a little strange, he asked with concern, Taizu, what's wrong with you? Shang Guanjing took a deep breath. I'm fine. Look at how nonchalant the children were. He couldn't embarrass himself too much. Rong Xiao asked, perhaps. Taizu also yearns for the sacred artifact? Chu Luiyue nodded in understanding. I see. How about this? If we find other sacred artifacts in the future, we'll keep them for you, Taizu? Shang Guanjing slipped and hurriedly reached out to support himself against the wall beside him, barely managing to stand firm. Ahem. No need. Such treasures depend on one's luck. If one doesn't have that luck, it's useless even if they keep holding it in their hands. You don't have to worry about me. Wasn't Wei Zhe like this before? Although he had obtained the 10,000 peaks halberd, it still hadn't recognized him as its master after such a long time. On the other hand, Rong Xiao had just casually held the 10,000 peaks halberd in his hand and directly became its new master. It was useless no matter how envious, jealous, or hateful others were. They didn't deliberately lower their voices, so Wei Zhe, who followed them in, quickly heard these words. When Wei Zhe learned that the 10,000 peaks halberd had recognized Rong Xiao as its master, he felt as if he had been struck by lightning. It wasn't easy for him to obtain it. The entire family Wei had only possessed this sacred artifact for thousands of years. However, as soon as he took it out, it became someone else's in the blink of an eye. Rong Xiao. Aren't you going overboard by doing this? Wei Zhe finally couldn't hold it in and questioned sternly. Previously, I was very polite to you out of respect for your identity as the Holy Sun. Is this what you did? The distance between the two of them wasn't far. Moreover, the tunnel was bright so they could see each other. Rong Xiu chuckled. Family Wei is the Lord. Sacred artifacts have spirits so they choose their own masters. It had been in your hands for so long, but you couldn't become its master. This only proves that there's no fate between the two of you. Now that the 10,000 Peaks halberd has chosen I as its master, how can I reject it? You. Wei Zhe was exasperated. However, Rong Xiu's words were reasonable and he couldn't refute them at all. If he had to blame someone, he could only blame himself for not having such luck. Wei Zhe couldn't help but feel regret. If he had known this would happen, he wouldn't have taken it out. Now Tang Ke's tomb had been opened by Chu Luiyue, and the 10,000 Peaks halberd had become Rong Xiu's. This was a huge loss. Chu Luiyue raised his voice slightly. Lord of Family Wei, since we're already here, you should save your energy. Who knows what dangers we'll face down there? After all, you're the Lord of Family Wei. It won't be good if you die here. Wei Zhe was furious. His face was ashen. These two people really knew how to infuriate people better than the other. A few Family Wei members behind him tried to persuade him in a low voice. Lord, we don't know what's going on down there. Why don't we wait and see? That's right. After all, it was Shang Guanyu who opened the door. No matter what, we have to know what's going on down there. What do you think? If he fell out with the other party here, then who knew what would happen? When Wei Zhe heard this, he knew that they had a point. He could only suppress his anger for the time being. I'll get my revenge sooner or later. Silence returned to the passageway. Only the sound of everyone's breathing and footsteps could be heard. Although the surroundings were still bright and resplendent, the atmosphere became more and more tense as they went down, perhaps out of fear and worry for the unknown. The people behind them gradually caught up with them. Chu Luiyue didn't need to turn around to know that the people outside had all entered the passageway. Now, it would be even more difficult for them to fight for anything. After some time, they finally reached the last step of the passageway. She looked forward and was suddenly stunned. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2054. Not far ahead, there was an entrance. The entrance was in the shape of an arch and led straight inside. It was pitch black inside. No one knew what was on the other side and what kind of scenery it was. There was a biting cold wind surging out from inside. The strands of hair on Chu Luiyue's forehead fluttered gently and landed on her face, making it itchy. She casually tucked it behind her ear and walked forward. Wait. Sheng Guanjing hurriedly pulled her back. This place is very strange. It's better to be careful. Chu Luiyue chuckled and patted his arm. Don't worry. Since I can open this door, I'm not afraid of danger. Besides, aren't you and Rong Xiu here? Only then did Sheng Guanjing relax a little. Actually, thinking about it carefully, Yuer's current combat strength should not be much worse than his. If she summoned Dumpling and Zichen, she would definitely win. She must have the strength to deal with Yi Wentao. Actually, if he came alone, he wouldn't have these worries. The main reason was that he couldn't let go of Chu Luiyue. Even though he knew that she was powerful now, his heart couldn't help but beat faster at the thought of her facing danger. Meeting Chu Luiyue's calm gaze, Sheng Guanjing finally let go of her. Chu Luiyue stepped forward and approached step by step. The surrounding lights were bright, but not a single ray of light could flow into the thick darkness. There seemed to be an invisible barrier at the arch-like entrance, completely dividing this space into two parts. Chu Luiyue walked to the front and stood still. Buzz. Standing here, the faintly discernible buzzing sound became clearer and clearer. Clearly, all of the commotion was coming from inside. Footsteps kept coming from behind. Obviously, more and more people were walking down. Everyone's gaze was focused on Chu Luiyue. Dead silence. Chu Luiyue's eyes were filled with determination. After gently exhaling, she clenched Scarlet Heaven Sword in her hand and took a step forward. Soon, half of her body merged into the darkness. Everyone held their breaths and didn't even blink, afraid that they would miss something. The sound of feet hitting the ground could be heard. Chu Luiyue's figure finally disappeared before everyone's eyes. A thick darkness shrouded everything in front of her eyes. She knew that she had passed through the entrance and completely entered this strange black space. But the surroundings were still quiet. Chu Luiyue could even hear his own heartbeat and breathing. She looked left and right. What entered his eyes was a thick black that could not be dissolved. A gust of wind blew over, bringing with it a slight chill. The buzzing sound seemed to be coming from all directions. Chu Luiyue listened carefully for a while, but still couldn't tell where it came from. She raised her sword, intending to summon a flame for illumination. However, the moment the reddish-gold flame appeared, it was quickly extinguished. Chu Luiyue was stunned for a moment. It seemed that there was some kind of force suppressing the surroundings. A faint layer of pressure seemed to be gradually enveloping her. I want to come out. Dumpling's soft voice sounded, with a hint of curiosity and anticipation. Chu Luiyue was a little surprised. Now? Yes. Although Dumpling was lively and active, she had always been very sensible. At critical moments, she always knew what she should and shouldn't do. It was rare for her to take the initiative to speak like this. Chu Luiyue only thought for a moment before agreeing. Okay. But you can't run around. You must follow me well here, understand? Dumpling hurriedly agreed. Yes. Dumpling listens to Ayu the most. Only then did Chu Luiyue feel relieved. With a thought, Dumpling's figure immediately appeared beside her. A layer of reddish-gold flame burned on her body, but it seemed to be suppressed by some kind of power. The flame was slightly weak. Chu Luiyue's eyes narrowed slightly. Dumpling had opened her fifth meridian and was very strong. Adding to the fact that she had a pure bloodline, her pressure could not be underestimated. Even Yi Wentao had not been able to gain an advantage against her. Yet here, Dumpling's presence was still at a disadvantage. I wonder what is in this darkness. At this time, a strange ripple came from her body. She stilled slightly. This ripple came from the armillary's shield. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, a bright light suddenly poured down from above her head. Where the light reached, the thick darkness in the surroundings suddenly retreated. It was as if the dust accumulated over the years was suddenly wiped away, and everything gradually revealed its original appearance. All the scenes slowly appeared in front of Chu Luiyue. This was an extremely wide circular space. The tall walls were a dense and dark black, very similar to the armillary's shield. And on the circular wall, there were incomparably thick bronze doors. There was only a beam of light falling from the dome above her head, and it was unclear. Chu Luiyue was standing at the entrance of this huge space. With her as the center, there were 5 doors on each side. In total, there were 10 doors. The vast pressure was coming from these bronze doors. She stared blankly at the scene in front of her. She had never thought that it would be like this inside. Was this really Tang Ku's tomb? However, from the looks of it, it really didn't look like a tomb, and the 10 doors were all smooth and flat. There were no patterns carved on them. They were completely the same. Other than that, there was nothing else here. It was even too empty. The people outside also noticed the changes inside. Rong Xiao and the others walked in one after another. Sheng Wanjing looked around and was also stunned. To think that he had been worried for a long time. Now, it seemed that it was very different from what he had expected. He waited patiently for a while and did not discover any danger. Do you see anything? Chu Luiyue stared at the 10 bronze doors thoughtfully. Not yet. She vaguely felt that these doors were a little different, but nothing had happened yet, so it was not easy to guess. Sheng Wanjing followed her gaze and frowned. What? Why are there so many doors here? At this moment, Wei Zhe and the others saw that Chu Luiyue and the others were fine and walked in one after another. Hearing Sheng Wanjing's words, everyone fell into deep thought. Suddenly Wei Zhe's eyes lit up. 10 doors? Didn't Tang Ku refine 10 sacred artifacts in the battle with Mr. Su back then? Perhaps it corresponds to these 10 doors? These words immediately gained the approval of many people. It was not unreasonable to guess like that. Otherwise, who would leave 10 bronze doors here? I want to go over. Dumpling tugged at Chu Luiyue's hand and whispered. Chu Luiyue looked in the direction she was pointing. You want to go to the middle? Dumpling nodded vigorously. Yes. Chu Luiyue thought for a moment. Okay, I'll go with you. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2055. She held Scarlet Heaven's sword tightly in one hand and Dumpling in the other as she walked towards the center. Rong Xiao looked up slightly and stared at her. His gaze was deep and there seemed to be waves in his eyes, but they disappeared in an instant. The closer they got to the center, the clearer Chu Luiyue realized that the pressure on her body became. However, she did not sense any dangerous killing intent from it. The space was very big and Chu Luiyue walked very cautiously, so it took them a while to finally reach the center. When they got closer, Chu Luiyue realized that there seemed to be some kind of pattern engraved in the center of the ground. However, probably because it was too old, it was already blurred and difficult to distinguish. Dumpling's eyes lit up and she was about to step on it happily. Chu Luiyue pulled her back. Dumpling, do you know what that is? Dumpling blinked and shook her head. I don't know. Chu Luiyue. I don't know why you want to go so badly. Yes. Dumpling tilted her head and thought for a while. I don't know what's going on either, but I really want to go. Chu Luiyue looked at her, her thoughts surging. What is it that can make Dumpling have such a reaction? Ayu, don't worry. I can feel that it's not dangerous up there. Just let me go. Dumpling hugged Chu Luiyue's thigh and began to act coquettishly. Chu Luiyue touched her hair bun, feeling amused and helpless. Okay, just go. Dumpling's intuition had always been very accurate. Since she said so, then there should be no problem. I knew it, Ayu is the best. Dumpling's eyes curved in joy and she rubbed against her leg. Chu Luiyue grabbed her little hand and paused for a moment before finally taking a step forward. When her feet landed on the veined pattern, the faint buzzing sound from before exploded in her ears like a sudden clap of thunder. A ray of resplendent light suddenly erupted from beneath her feet. Chu Luiyue subconsciously raised his hand to cover his eyes. Boom, boom. Something was gushing out of it. The sharp and biting cold aura was like the edge of a blade as it swiftly flew past her body, sticking close to her body and narrowly escaping. It took a while before it gradually calmed down. Chu Luiyue could faintly feel that there were streaks of light flickering around him. She was slightly stunned. She put down her hand and looked around. When she saw the scene in front of her, even she couldn't help but widen her eyes in shock as she stood there in a daze. As for the others present, they were all stunned. Looking at everything before them, they were speechless. In the vast space, streaks of light were densely packed and intertwined with each other. What entered his eyes was like a dazzling river of stars, causing him to be dazzled. And these, all of them were Tianlei. Countless dazzling silver bolts of heavenly lightning filled the entire space. They flowed slowly like water, yet they were brilliant, holy, and powerful. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped flowing. Everything seemed insignificant in the face of this vast and shocking power. Chu Luiyue stared blankly. These were all gushing out from beneath her feet just now? Dumpling screamed excitedly. Ah, that's great. I knew it. I knew it. She let go of Chu Luiyue's hand and started running as if she was running, passing through the countless bolts of lightning. She was like a fish swimming freely in the water, but also like a ball of fire burning freely with the wind. Her crisp and cute voice was especially clear in this quiet space. Wherever she passed, streaks of Tianlei energy rushed into her body like silver snakes. And the aura on her body began to rise at an alarming speed. Chu Luiyue looked at this scene and finally understood. No wonder Dumpling was so eager and enthusiastic. It turned out that she had long sensed that there were countless Tianlei buried under the ground. Previously, in the Thousand Wine Mountain, she was the same. She soaked in the spring water that accumulated countless Tianlei energy for an entire month. It was also that time that Dumpling successfully broke through the shackles and became a crimson gold sky phoenix. This scene was so familiar, but it was not exactly the same. Because the Tianlei accumulated in the Thousand Wine Mountain spring was just a drop in the ocean compared to this place. There was no comparison between the two. Who knew how many years it would take to gather such a shocking amount of Tianlei? Chu Luiyue suddenly thought of something and looked down. The ground under her feet had returned to normal. The patterns on it had also dissipated. She instantly understood something. That was a seal? At this moment, everyone finally came back to their senses. Why are there so many Tianlei here? Perhaps they were all left behind by Senior Tang Ku? It's possible. After all, he was the top craftsman back then. His ability to trigger Tianlei is extremely strong. Wouldn't it be easy to refine a divine artifact here? Or perhaps Senior Tang Ku's inheritance is here? All kinds of voices came one after another. Many people's expressions had changed from the initial shock and confusion to excitement and anticipation. There were even many people who were ready to make a move. Wei Zhe could not help but reach out his hand and reach toward the Tianlei closest to him. A scorching pain came from the center of his palm. Wei Zhe cried out in pain and quickly retracted his hand, but there were still shocking wounds on his hand. He was shocked and angry at the same time, and a deep sense of fear appeared in his heart. When he looked at the Tianlei again, his expression was very different from before. The surrounding people also looked over. Sheng Guanjing sneered. These are Tianlei that contain extremely strong power. Even the exalted gods would find it difficult to deal with them. Family Wei, do you really think you're an ancient divine beast and can withstand the power of these Tianlei with just your body alone? The crowd roared with laughter. Wei Zhe's face turned red and white, but he had nothing to say. This time he was too careless. When he saw Dumpling running happily over there, he could not help but reach out his hand. These Tianlei filled the entire space and moved slowly, automatically avoiding the crowd. However, if someone touched them, they would not avoid them. Wei Zhe only saw Dumpling's aura rising continuously, but he forgot that she was a crimson gold celestial phoenix. Ordinary people could not be compared to her. He gritted his teeth and said, "I can't do it. If I can't do it, how many of you here can do it? This Tianlei's power is amazing, but we can only watch." As soon as he said that, the smiles on many people's faces faded. That's right. If they could only watch and not use it, wouldn't it be a wasted trip? At this moment, a deep, magnetic and somewhat weathered man's voice was heard. "These Tianlei are indeed for you to use." Chu Luiyue suddenly looked up. The voice came from behind the bronze door. However, it was difficult to tell which door it came from. Chu Luiyue said loudly, "This humble one is Shang Guanyu. May I know your name, senior?" The voice laughed. "You trespassed on my territory and now you're asking who I am?" Chu Luiyue's pupils shrank. Tangko. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2056. In this world, there were only a handful of people who could call themselves saint. And Tang Ku, who had once refined 5 sacred artifacts, was one of them. Therefore, even if he had not seen the other party's appearance, Chu Luiyue immediately guessed his identity. "You are Senior Tang Ku?" Chu Luiyue asked tentatively. Even though he was 70 to 80% sure in his heart, he still had to ask this question. The moment the 2 words Tang Ku came out, everyone immediately stopped talking. They all pricked up their ears and listened attentively. This question was exactly what they wanted to ask. What answered Chu Luiyue was a meaningful laugh. "I didn't expect that after 10,000 years, there would still be people who remember this saint's name." It was indeed him. Chu Luiyue reacted extremely quickly, immediately cupping his fists and bowing respectfully. "Junior has long heard of Senior's great reputation. It is Junior's fortune to have met you today." These words were true. As one of the only 2 powerful existences in the entire divine ruins who had ever refined a sacred artifact, Tang Ku was like an insurmountable mountain. His name was deeply engraved in the hearts of every weapon refiner. Most people would never have the chance to see a sacred artifact in their entire lives. Not to mention seeing Tang Ku. Now, the real Tang Ku had actually appeared here. How could they not be excited? Even if it was just a voice to the weapon refiners present, they would have no regrets. After a short silence, Wei Zhe and the others also reacted and bowed. "Greetings, Senior Tang Ku." Many people were so excited that their faces flushed red, and even their bodies began to tremble. If it wasn't for the fact that they couldn't tell where the voice came from, they would have already knelt down. Tang Ku, however, laughed and teased, "Don't worry. This saint is only half a remnant soul now. How did you all see it?" Everyone was speechless for a moment and looked at each other. They did not expect Tang Ku to say such words. Chu Luiyue was also somewhat surprised. She had originally thought that an existence like Tang Ku should be high and mighty, sacred and dignified. But now she felt that it was very different from what she had expected. "Girl, come over here." Tang Ku's voice came from all directions. No one knew which direction she was referring to when she said, "Go forward." However, they could all tell that this lass was for Chu Luiyue. In an instant, all eyes were on Chu Luiyue. Everyone had different expressions. Surprise, suspicion, uneasiness, envy. Who didn't want to win Tang Ku's favor? If Tang Ku was happy, he might even pass on everything he had learned in his lifetime. Chu Luiyue turned a blind eye to these gazes. She knew what Tang Ku meant. "Yes." She responded and stepped forward without hesitation. His feet landed right on the spot where the seal had been. At this moment, Chu Luiyue clearly felt a gaze that seemed to have materialized on his body. Her heart tightened. It was Tang Ku's eyes. But fortunately, this gaze wasn't aggressive. Chu Luiyue's expression was calm as she stood there calmly, allowing the other party to size her up. This was their territory. If the other party really wanted to do something, they wouldn't have waited until now. "You're not old, but you've got guts." Tang Ku suddenly snorted. His voice was dignified without being angry. "Do you know what kind of sin it is to disturb this saint?" As his voice fell in the vast space, countless Tianlei suddenly changed directions and rushed toward Chu Luiyue. It was as if in the next moment, if she said one wrong word, these terrifying Tianlei would all strike down without hesitation. The atmosphere was tense, on the verge of breaking out. Peach Blossom Dock-U Mansion. In the courtyard, little Hachi was sitting at a stone table under the shade of a tree. In front of her was a basket of peach blossom petals that she had just picked. The sun shone down, and the shadows of the trees were mottled. A gentle breeze blew and the branches and leaves swayed. The spots of light were like twinkling stars. It accentuated her jade-like skin, beautiful and enchanting. She picked up a petal from the basket and looked at it carefully. Then she shook her head and revealed a look of slight disdain. Her delicate fingers, which were painted with nail polish, moved slightly, and the petal fell to the ground with the wind. There was already a large patch of pinkish-white petals at her feet. Then she picked up another petal. Sister 8. 13 walked in from outside. His forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat, and he was panting slightly. Little Hachi raised her eyelids and glanced at him, which was rare. Just ran back? Yes. Big brother gave you extra training again? 13 nodded and pursed his lips into a smile. As expected, nothing can escape Sister 8's eyes. Little Hachi smiled, and there was a hint of pride in her eyes. Of course. Although it was not difficult for anyone to guess what had happened when they saw 13's current appearance, Little Hachi had never rejected such compliments. Sister 8, why did you pick these petals? 13 asked curiously. Recently, Sister 8 seemed to be particularly relaxed. Little Hachi picked up a petal. Naturally, it's for bathing and smelling. It just snowed a few days ago, and the fragrance of these petals is at its strongest. Of course, we have to hurry. Otherwise, when the snow melts, the smell will be much fainter. The peach blossoms in Peach Blossom Cove were different from those in other places. She had only discovered this recently, so she was happily fiddling with these things. Those that don't look good, those that haven't bloomed properly, or those that have bloomed too much, can't be used. 13 was confused. This has a big impact? Anyway, they're all used for smelling. The shape and so on, it seems, there's no difference. Little Hachi shook her head mysteriously. You're still young, so you don't understand. This thing will affect Sister 8's mood, so it's very important. She had always spared no effort in this kind of thing and wanted to do her best. 13 nodded as if he understood. Anyway, Sister 8's words always seemed to make sense. 13? At this moment, a familiar voice came from outside the courtyard. Little Hachi and 13 looked towards the source of the voice. Nan? The two were surprised. During this period, Nan Su Huai had been staying in Peach Blossom Cove, but he spent most of his time outside and rarely appeared in the U residence. So when they saw him, Little Hachi and 13 were very surprised. Nan Su Huai walked over. Little Hachi stood up and bowed together with 13. Nan Su Huai laughed. This old man just happened to pass by here. You don't have to worry about it, just do what you need to do. As he said that, he looked at 13 again and said with some emotion and surprise. 13, it's only been such a short time and you broke through again? 13 was now a stage 8 warrior. He smiled shyly. The cultivation environment here is good, so my cultivation is naturally faster. It's all thanks to Master and Big Brother. By the way, are you here today to look for Master? She's not here today. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2057. Nan Su Huai waved his hand with a smile. I know she's not here. I'm not here to look for her. 13 paused for a second before he reacted. Not many people knew that his master and his highness had left. But Nan Su Huai was his master's master, so it wasn't strange that he knew about it. Then why are you here today? Nan Su Huai stroked his beard and smiled. Nothing. I finished my business here. I'm going to rest today so I can return to the academy tomorrow. His only purpose was to help Chu Luiwei gain a foothold in Peach Blossom Dock. Now that he had achieved his goal, he should return to the academy. After all, he had been away for a long time. 13 came to a realization and nodded. Then he asked hesitantly, I see. Then, are you not waiting for my master and his highness to come back? Nan Su Huai was about to leave, but when he heard 13's question, he found it interesting. He glanced at 13. 13, are you worried about them? No. 13 immediately shook his head and looked at Nan Su Huai's eyes that seemed to have seen through him. I heard that the Chingu Slope is family Wei's territory. If my master and his highness go there alone, what if... Bang. Before he could finish, Little Hachi walked up and slapped the back of 13's head. Bah! What nonsense are you talking about? My master and his highness are blessed by the heavens. Why would they be in danger? She put her hands together and prayed sincerely. Children's words carry no harm. 13 touched his head. Sister 8, I'm not a child anymore. He was a head taller than Sister 8. Little Hachi glanced at him. 13 immediately shut his mouth obediently. It seemed like Brother 10's teachings were right. Almost no one in the 13U could compete with Sister 8. But the best way to save his life was, Sister 8 was always right. Nan Suhui stroked his beard and smiled. Little 813, you don't have to worry. Nothing will happen to them this time. After all, they were going to Tang Ke's tomb. With his high Rong Xiao and senior Shangguan, what problem could not be solved? Judging from his tone, he seemed to be very assured about this matter. Little Hachi was instantly interested. She leaned forward and asked, why is Dean Nan so sure? Although Shangguan Jing and the others were powerful, Tang Ke was even more famous. Who knew what kind of traps and dangers were hidden in Tang Ke's tomb? Nan Suhui coughed and said, this? Think about it. There's no need to talk about senior Shangguan. Even Rong Xiao and you have extremely high talent in refining weapons. If even they can't handle it, then there's no need to talk about the others, right? Hearing Nan Suhui praise her master, little Hachi was satisfied. That's true. Since even you have said so, then we are even more at ease. Nan Suhui laughed and looked at the two of them with emotion. Previously he didn't know much about the 13 Yu, but this time, Chu Luiyue took down the Peach Blossom dock. It could be said that the 13 Yu had made a great contribution. Little Hachi in front of him was usually very delicate. She was very particular about her makeup and clothes. Just standing there, she was enchanting and could be said to be a stunner. However, when it came to doing things, she was not careless. Previously, in order to repair the medicinal herbs in the Peach Blossom dock, she had been working with Shi Fang and put in a lot of effort. From then on, Nan Suhui knew that he had underestimated the ability of the 13 Yu. The people chosen by Yu seemed to have different personalities, but in fact, all of them were extremely outstanding. It was no wonder that 13 was unwilling to go to Lingxiao College to cultivate. Perhaps he would be able to learn even more by following these people. He wondered where Yu had chosen these people from back then. Nan Suhui sighed in his heart. After exchanging a few more pleasantries, he left. After he left, little Hachi's body softened. She sat down again and focused on choosing the petals. 13. Xin Yi's voice suddenly sounded from outside. 13 hurriedly turned around. Big brother. Xin Yi raised his chin. Continue. Yes. 13 was already used to Xin Yi's training and hurriedly ran over. When he came to Xin Yi's side and saw that calm and indifferent face, 13 hesitated for a moment. Big brother, you don't seem to be worried about Master and the others? Xin Yi raised his eyebrows slightly. Is what Dean Nan said not enough? 13 was stunned. Based on Big Brother's words. Does he really think that Master will be safe and sound with Grand Ancestor and His Highness Saint around? Big Brother, you seem to. His Highness Saint is very. Think highly of him? Admire him? Respect him? 13 was speechless for a moment and didn't know what to say. Big Brother was indifferent and arrogant. There were very few people who could enter his eyes. But it seemed that from the start, his attitude towards His Highness was very polite. Xin Yi glanced at him indifferently. It won't be too late to ask these questions when you become a high god. Clear ancient slope, messy stone forest. Tang Ke's questioning voice reverberated throughout the entire space, bringing with it a heavy pressure as it fell down heavily. Chu Liyue's shoulders seemed to be pressed by something, and the blood in her body rushed quickly. Everyone also subconsciously held their breaths. Was Tang Ke going to hold Chu Liyue accountable? Amidst the silence, Chu Liyue raised her chin, curved her lips and said word by word, Senior, weren't you the one who let me in? Dead silence. Many people looked at each other in surprise. What did Chu Liyue mean by that? Tang Ke let her in? How was that possible? Wei Zhe couldn't help but sneer. This Chu Liyue really thought of herself as someone important. Who did she think she was to make someone like Tang Ke do this for her? She was really bold. Tang Ke wouldn't let her off easily for saying such things. However, just as everyone thought that Chu Liyue was going to be punished for this, they suddenly heard a hearty laugh. Ha! Girl, you're really smart. Tang Ke's voice was filled with undisguised joy and admiration. The atmosphere instantly changed and the hostility from before dissipated instantly. Tang Ke's smile immediately stunned everyone present. What did that mean? Could it be that Tang Ke really took the initiative to let Chu Liyue in? But didn't he stay here and never go out? Then how did he get in touch with Chu Liyue? Hearing Tang Ke's voice, Chu Liyue's eyes curved slightly, but she secretly heaved a sigh of relief. She had made the right bet. The reason why she was the only one who could open the door outside was because it was Tang Ke's idea. And the reason why he chose her out of so many people. Chu Liyue's hand slowly tightened as a guess flashed through her mind. Perhaps it had something to do with the armillary shield in her body. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2058. That's right. You were able to open the door and enter this place because of my instructions. However, I originally thought that you would come in by yourself. I didn't expect you to bring so many people with you." Tang Ke's deep voice reverberated in the vast space. Everyone had different expressions when they heard this. Why did these words sound so uncomfortable? Could it be that Tang Ke had chosen Chu Luiyue alone from the beginning? And they were able to enter because of Chu Luiyue? This made the people who were waiting to see Chu Luiyue make a fool of themselves speechless and feel very upset. No one would be in a good mood after hearing such words. Sheng Wanjing was very happy. Anyway, you was promising and he was proud. If you really inherited Tang Ke's mantle in the end, he would be happier and more excited than if he got these things. Rong Xiu stood at the side with his hands behind his back. Upon hearing this, he tilted his head slightly and glanced at Chu Luiyue. His originally cold eyes and eyebrows had a faint smile on them. Chu Luiyue's lips curled up slightly. "I was stupid and didn't understand senior's meaning." Although she said that, her expression was relaxed and there was no regret or annoyance on her face. Tang Ke seemed a little surprised. "Don't you think it's a pity?" "What's a pity?" "It's a pity? You could have enjoyed such a great opportunity alone. Little girl, this sage will give you another chance. As long as you agree, I can send everyone out now and only leave you alone. And all my inheritance will be inherited by you at that time." When these words were said, everyone was shocked and in an uproar. "Senior Tang Ke." Finally, someone in the crowd couldn't hold back and stepped forward to speak. "Senior, please reconsider. Although we can't open that door in terms of talent and strength, we are not inferior to Shang Guanyu in the slightest. In fact, we are even better. If you really want to choose someone to inherit your mantle, it must be the most outstanding person in the world. Shang Guanyu may not be qualified for this position." Yes. Shang Guanyu's cultivation as a martial artist was truly outstanding. Even at the high deity realm, he could fight against a supreme god expert. But in terms of refining, she may not be the best choice for you. You must consider it carefully. Senior Tang Ke. All kinds of voices kept coming, all trying to dissuade Tang Ke from making this decision. From their point of view, if Tang Ke really chose Chu Luiyue, it was really unreasonable and a big mistake. Of all the people present, which one of them wasn't better at refining armaments than her? In terms of strength and experience, she was the one who had no competition at all. "I really don't know what's wrong with Tang Ke. She actually made such a choice." Tang Ke asked. "Girl, what do you think?" Chu Luiyue snorted inwardly. This senior Tang Ke was really not easy to deal with. If he really wanted to pass the inheritance to her, he could have just let her in from the very beginning and shut the door on everyone else. Why do you have to do this now? Just now he had already made it clear. If she chose to drive these people out now, everyone would point their fingers at her. For Tang Ke, this was a simple matter. After all, he was the master here. But for her, it would cause a lot of trouble. Although she wasn't afraid, she didn't want to take the blame for nothing. Therefore, she raised her eyes slightly and smiled. "Senior Tang Ke, it's a great honor to be able to inherit your legacy. But since I'm the one who brought them in, there's no reason to drive them out now. So, you're saying that you want to keep them?" Tang Ke asked. "Do you know that if you do this, it means that you have to compete with them again? I don't need to remind you of the difficulties involved. You should understand it yourself, right?" Chu Luiyue nodded. "I understand. I'm willing to compete with everyone fairly. Only those who have the talent and opportunity will be able to inherit your legacy. This is the most suitable way, isn't it?" As soon as Chu Luiyue finished speaking, the surroundings fell into a strange silence. The crowd, who were speaking passionately just now, quietened down. They looked at Chu Luiyue with different expressions. From their standpoint, it was normal for them to say those words. After all, the opportunity was right in front of them. They had to try and fight for it. But if they were Chu Luiyue, they wouldn't say those words like her. Tang Ke's legacy. Countless craftsmen in the world dreamed of it, but it was out of their reach. Now, as long as she opened her mouth, she could get it easily. But she had rejected him? She even said that she wanted to compete with them. Was there something wrong with her brain? Or did she think that she would definitely win? "Master Yu of Peach Blossom Cove, you're indeed worthy of your reputation. You're magnanimous and upright. I'm really impressed by your breadth of mind." Wei Zhe cupped his fists and said with a chuckle. However, his tone was somewhat ambiguous. "Master Yu, you're so confident that you can come out on top?" Chu Luiyue glanced at him and her eyes curved. "Compared to the seniors here, I'm still inexperienced and not worth mentioning." Today he was fortunate enough to be recognized by Senior Tang Ke and be able to compete with the other seniors. It was already a rare blessing. Her words were rather humble. As soon as she said that, many people's expressions softened. This Shangguan Yu didn't seem to be as arrogant and domineering as the rumors said. Moreover, her actions were equivalent to giving the others a chance. Everyone had a good impression of her. A fair competition based on everyone's ability was good for everyone. The originally tense atmosphere eased up quite a bit. Wei Zhe cursed in his heart. Cunning. She was just saying nice words. If she wasn't afraid of these people and was worried that she would be besieged, she wouldn't have made such a choice and said such words. But the situation had changed. Wei Zhe knew that it wasn't good to keep suppressing Chu Luiyue, so he could only wave his sleeves. Then we'll wait and see Master Yu's glory. Tang Ke asked. Are you sure? Chu Luiyue nodded. I've made up my mind. Please enlighten me, Senior Tang Ke. Tang Ke laughed heartily when she heard that. Good. Since you've said so, I'll treat you all equally. It's easy to get my inheritance. The Tianlei here is something that I've accumulated for tens of thousands of years. From now on, you can think of all ways to devour it. There's no time limit for this competition. Whoever devours the most will be the final winner. Of course, if any of you can't withstand the power of the Tianlei and explode, I won't be responsible. It's up to you to decide what to do. The final winner will be able to open the 10 bronze doors and obtain my inheritance. Wonderful book room. Chapter 2059. After Tang Ke finished speaking, everyone was a little dazed. This is the competition? Isn't it too simple and crude? But after thinking about it carefully, they had to admit that this was indeed an extremely effective method for weapon refiners to quickly determine the winner. This was because the difference in strength between weapon refiners was largely reflected in the ability to trigger Tianlei. The higher the level, the stronger the strength and the more Tianlei that could be triggered. Now that there were so many Tianlei here, it was a lot more convenient. Senior Tang Ke, may I ask if only we can participate in this competition or can we have outside help? Wei Zhe suddenly spoke. Tang Ke laughed. Naturally, only we can participate. Then, the scarlet gold heavenly phoenix that Shangguan Yu has contracted is an ancient divine beast, and it has an extremely strong ability to devour Tianlei. If this is also counted as Shangguan Yu, wouldn't it be a little unfair to others? Shangguan Jing couldn't help but scold. Wei Zhe, do you still have any shame? Our family's girl has already agreed not to chase you out and compete with you. Do you still think it's not enough? If you really feel that it's unfair, why don't you go and contract an ancient divine beast yourself? What do you mean by always having ideas about you're the dignified head of the family way after all, how can you actually say such words? Are you that afraid of losing? These words caused Wei Zhe's face to turn red. He took a deep breath, trying his best to suppress his anger, and said in a deep voice. Senior Shangguan, I'm just speaking the truth. I believe that everyone present has this layer of concern, right? Contract an ancient divine beast? There's only one in the entire Divine Ruins world for so many years. How can they compete? If the Scarlet Gold Heavenly Phoenix is really counted, there's no need for them to compete in this round. Tang Ke paused as if she was thinking and then asked. Girl, what do you think? What do I think? What else can I think? Chu Luiyue cursed in her heart. This Tang Ke was really digging a hole for her to jump into. However, she could only accept it now. Since the head of the family Wei has said so, if I don't agree, wouldn't it seem like I don't know etiquette and take advantage of everyone? Chu Luiyue smiled faintly. Dumpling doesn't count, but I have a request. Go ahead. Although Dumpling is not participating in this competition, she has always liked to devour the power of Tianlei to refine her muscles and bones. So, Senior Tang Ke, please allow Dumpling to continue staying here. Of course. Tang Ke agreed without hesitation. Wei Zhe, do you have any other requests? Wei Zhe hurriedly replied, replying to Senior Tang Ke no. He had achieved his goal and that was enough. Everyone else nodded in agreement without saying a word. After all, Dumpling was Chu Luiyue's contracted divine beast. If she insisted on letting Dumpling participate, the others wouldn't have any reason to refute. Now that she agreed to not count Dumpling's results, it was already a big compromise. If they were to continue speaking, everyone would feel ashamed and embarrassed. Without the help of the Crimson Gold Celestial Phoenix, how could Chu Luiyue be their opponent alone? Although everyone knew that Chu Luiyue was Nansu Huai's disciple and was also an all-rounder in cultivation, the fame she made in the Divine Ruins world was related to martial artists and mystic cultivators. As for smithing, no one had heard of it before. However, as the Holy Sun, Rongxiu seemed to have occupied the first place on the Green Cloud roll when he was in Lingxiao College. If they had the time, they might as well guard against Rongxiu. As for Chu Luiyue, without external help there was really no need to worry. Tang Ke said. Since that's the case, the competition will now, wait. Before he finished his sentence, he was suddenly interrupted by Chu Luiyue. Senior, I have another question. Fortunately, Tang Ke was patient and did not get angry. She only asked, Girl, what do you want to say? Chu Luiyue cupped her fists and bowed respectfully. What I want to ask is, if the contracted beast is considered external help and can't be counted in the results, then, what about the divine artifacts? Divine artifacts can also trigger Tianlei. Tang Ke laughed heartily. As long as it's your own and can trigger Tianlei with your own strength, it's naturally yours. Chu Luiyue's lips curled up. Thank you, Senior. Low whispers came from the crowd. Right. I heard that Shengguanyu has a lot of divine artifacts, even a divine artifact like the Heavenly Square Sacred Cauldron. With so many treasures, she has a higher chance of winning. So what? No matter how many divine weapons she had, wouldn't she still have to consume her own energy to trigger the heavenly lightning? I think she can't even fully utilize the power of a venerable divine artifact. Not to mention other things. That's true. The final test of this competition is one's talent and strength. Chu Luiyue looked calm as if she didn't hear the discussion at all. Tang Ke's voice soon reverberated throughout the entire space. Since you have no more questions then, let the competition begin. As soon as she finished speaking, the crowd dispersed and found a place to sit. They were not dumpling, so they couldn't rely on their own bodies to resist. The best way was to refine the divine artifact and use it to trigger the heavenly lightning. In a way, this competition was also a competition of everyone's ability to refine artifacts. After all, the higher the level of the divine artifact, the more Tianlei it could trigger. Fortunately, this place was spacious enough for everyone to spread out. Dumpling grabbed a Tianlei next to her and stuffed it into her mouth. Ayu, you really don't need my help? As he spoke, lightning flashed in all directions and fire blazed brightly. Some people were quietly sizing her up. When they saw this scene, their mouths couldn't help but twitch. It hurts just looking at her. The crimson gold celestial phoenix. She really lives up to her name. Chu Luiyue looked at her and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Could it be that she was also like this in the spring of Thousand Wine Mountain? Don't worry, your master can win even if she relies on herself. Chu Luiyue gave her a reassuring look. You can go and play by yourself first. Dumpling trusted her very much. When she heard her words, she immediately relaxed and raised her small face to smile brightly. Then I'll go. With that, she tiptoed and rushed toward the place where the Tianlei gathered. For a moment there was a crackling sound. The crowd fell silent. Fortunately, Wei Zhe said that just now. Otherwise there would be no point in competing. Fortunately, Shengguanyu won't be able to hold on for long. Someone in the crowd muttered softly. Clang. The sound of a heavy object falling to the ground was suddenly heard. Everyone who was about to go about their own business was shocked. They quickly looked over and saw a transparent cauldron suddenly appear in front of Chu Luiyue. That's the Heavenly Square Cauldron. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2060. It was rumored that one of the 10 great sacred artifacts, the Heavenly Square Cauldron, was in Chu Luiyue's hands. Because of this, many families and clans had forced their way to Fangzhou City and almost barged into Lingxiao College. This matter had caused quite a stir back then, so it was hard not to know about it. However, very few people had seen the Heavenly Square Cauldron with their own eyes. Now that Chu Luiyue took it out without hesitation, it attracted many people's attention. The Heavenly Square Cauldron was transparent and colorless karmic fire was burning inside. A heavy pressure was slowly emitted from it. I haven't seen this item in a long time. Tang Ke suddenly let out a long sigh. You and it are quite faded. Chu Luiyue smiled. This is my blessing. Tang Ke fell silent. Chu Luiyue's heart skipped a beat. For some reason, she felt that Tang Ke seemed to care more about the Heavenly Square Cauldron than the sacred artifacts he had made. Rongxiu was here. It was impossible that he didn't know that the Thousand Peaks halberd was in Rongxiu's hands. However, Tang Ke didn't mention it from the beginning until now. Instead, when she took out the Heavenly Square Cauldron, Tang Ke, she lowered her eyes and suppressed the thoughts in her heart. No matter what, she had to win this round first. She sat cross-legged and seemed to be ready to activate the Tianlei. Many gazes fell on her. After all, the Heavenly Square Cauldron was a sacred artifact. They were also very curious. It's rumored that the Heavenly Square Cauldron is used to make pills. However, this competition is about activating the Tianlei. If she wants to win, she has to activate the heavenly square cauldron with the strength and means of a blacksmith. This and refining medicine are two different things. Yes. In the end, she probably can't even summon half of the heavenly square cauldron's power. It's a pity that the heavenly square cauldron is in her hands. Clang. An ear-piercing clang suddenly sounded. Everyone was shocked and hurriedly looked in the direction of the voice. Rong Xiu had unknowingly summoned the 10,000 Peaks halberd and stabbed it into the ground. The end of the 10,000 Peaks halberd was still trembling because of the remaining power. With Wan Feng's halberd as the center, several cracks spread out on the incomparably hard ground. One had to know that so many Tianlei had rushed out from the ground, but not a single mark was left on the surface. Rong Xiu's attack contained an astonishing amount of power. As far as I know, no one here seems to have a saint artifact. Since he had already fallen behind, instead of thinking about how to catch up, he was just waiting for others to make a mistake so that he could sit back and enjoy the fruits of others' labor. I wonder when such a good thing would happen in this world? Rong Xiu's sword-like eyebrows raised slightly. His handsome and enchanting face seemed to be smiling, but the corners of his eyes and the tip of his eyebrows were filled with undisguised ridicule. His words didn't contain a single vulgar word, but it made many people's faces turn red with shame. Different from Chu Luiyue, who had just gained a foothold, Rong Xiu was already famous in the Divine Ruins world for a long time. All the major families and clans were always afraid of him when he was mentioned. If they met, they would be even more polite. No choice, this man was too ruthless. It was just that he hadn't fought much in recent years, especially this time when he came together with Chu Luiyue. Along the way, he had always been kind, gentle and elegant, causing many people to almost forget what kind of person he was in the past. At this moment, his move was obviously a warning. You, is about to start the competition. Everyone, please be quiet and don't disturb her. Rong Xiu's expression was languid as he said indifferently. Everyone felt sullen when they heard this. Listen to this. Is this something a human would say? What does he mean by asking everyone to be quiet when she's about to start the competition? Who here wasn't about to compete? Could it be that they weren't participating in the same competition? This is too much. However, although everyone was dissatisfied in their hearts, no one dared to say anything in front of him. Looking at Rong Xiu's posture, his thoughts weren't on the competition anyway. If anyone were to disturb Chu Luiyue, he would really do anything. They couldn't afford to offend him. Wei Zhe let out a long breath and tidied his clothes. Let them be arrogant for a while more. When the competition ended and they were utterly defeated, it wouldn't be too late to ridicule them and turn the situation around. After Rong Xiu spoke and openly threatened, all kinds of discussions finally stopped. For some reason, Tang Ke didn't say anything during this process. Perhaps it was because of the 1,000 Peaks halberd, many people thought in their hearts, but they quickly restrained their thoughts and began to focus on refining the divine weapons, preparing to trigger Tianlei. Sheng Guanjing glanced at Rong Xiu and asked curiously, Rong Xiu, you don't intend to participate in this competition? Compared to you, his innate talent and strength were only stronger and not weaker. If you're worried that you won't win, don't misunderstand. Rong Xiu knew that he had misunderstood, so he laughed and explained. I'm indeed not very interested in this. You can open the door and enter here first, which proves that she's the most suitable successor of Senior Tang Ke. No matter what others thought or how they fought, it was useless. Sheng Guanjing thought about it carefully and felt that it made sense, so he didn't say anything else. Boom. A loud sound was heard. Sheng Guanjing and the others hurriedly looked back and saw that Tianlei had already struck towards the heavenly square cauldron. Someone in the crowd couldn't sit still. So fast. The competition had just begun, and Chu Luiyue seemed to have just sat down. Why did the Tianlei come down? Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2061. The Tianlei quickly flew down and fell into the heavenly square cauldron, disappearing in the blink of an eye. From the beginning to the end, it did not cause any ripples at all. Everyone was stunned, but they quickly came to their senses. A divine artifact was a divine artifact after all. It was naturally easy for it to deal with a few Tianlei. After some time, when the number of Tianlei increased, Chu Luiyue would not be able to withstand it and would give up. Just as he was thinking, another bolt of heavenly lightning struck down. Just like the first one, it quickly and quietly drilled into the heavenly square cauldron. The transparent karmic fire burned fiercely and swallowed it in an instant. Everyone had different reactions. Some were envious, some were jealous, and some had already looked away and started to focus on themselves. After all, no matter how they looked at it, it would not improve their results at all. If they had the time and energy, they might as well try their best to trigger more Tianlei. Perhaps they could even take a gamble. When one person started, the others followed suit. Soon, bolts of heavenly thunder began to fly in different directions. Sheng Guanjing also stood beside Chu Luiyue and took out a sword embryo. This docking jade spiritual embryo is extremely precious. Fortunately, I did not have time to carefully polish it before. Otherwise, I would have wasted today's great opportunity. From all aspects, the heavenly lightning here was far beyond what he could summon. If he could use the Tianlei here to refine it, it would definitely be more convenient. The quality of the divine artifact that was forged would also be more outstanding. No matter whether he could obtain Tang Ke's inheritance or not, it was extremely rare and precious to be able to cultivate in this sea of lightning. Sheng Guanjing slightly staggered his feet, and the docking jade spiritual embryo quietly floated in front of him. He closed his eyes gently and began to activate the power in his body. Soon, bolts of heavenly lightning struck one after another. The most shocking thing was that the Tianlei all fell on the same spot on the docking jade spiritual embryo. Some people who saw this scene from afar could not help but exclaim inwardly, "I've long heard that Sheng Guanjing is a top-notch weapon refining venerable. Now that I've seen it with my own eyes, he is indeed amazing. This level of control and sensitivity is indeed not something an ordinary person can compare to." After all, he was someone who had fought against 7 weapon refining venerables back then and remained undefeated. Although he had been in a deep slumber for 1,000 years, his strength had not diminished at all. He is indeed an extremely strong opponent. Rong Xiu, on the other hand, stood in the same spot, leaning on the Thousand Peaks halberd. His arms were crossed and he looked lazy. From the looks of it, he really did not intend to participate in this battle. Yan Qing and Chang Wanzhou stood to the side in silence, waiting and guarding. In the vast space, only the 3 of them did not move. All kinds of noises gradually disappeared, leaving only the sound of Tianlei echoing in his ears. Chu Luiyue didn't seem to care about the outside world. He only stared at the heavenly square cauldron in front of him. As more and more Tianlei fell into the heavenly square cauldron, its pressure gradually increased, and its entire body became clearer and brighter. Chu Luiyue's force and mind were also constantly being depleted. However, his expression remained calm and focused. Time flew by quickly. In the blink of an eye, a day had passed. Looking around, other than Rong Xiu, Yan Qing, and Dumpling, who was still running around, the rest of the people were focused on the competition. However, after so long, the number of Tianlei in this space did not seem to have decreased. This showed how terrifying the number of Tianlei was. However, Dumpling was very happy. Ever since that time in the Eye of the Thousand Wine Spring, she had not been so happy in a long time. It was so blissful to be here. There were so many Tianlei here, and the power they contained was so strong that it might be difficult for an ordinary person to bear. However, for Dumpling, who had just opened her 5th meridian, it was the most comfortable. She ran up and down, left and right, barefoot. Her body flickered with silver light, which had not disappeared since the beginning. Rong Xiu tilted his head, glanced at her, and finally raised his hand. A snow-white figure instantly appeared in front of him. Wuxia. This is a rare opportunity. Go and play for a while. It was rare for Rong Xiu to be so merciful. Shui was so moved that tears welled up in its eyes. It roared excitedly and ran out. Some people heard the commotion and looked over. When they saw that Rong Xiu had released his contracted magical beast, many of them were shocked. Although the white lion was also a divine beast, it was much weaker than an ancient divine beast. Otherwise, the people present would have released their contracted divine beasts long ago. Even if it did not count towards the final result, it was still good to increase the strength of the contracted divine beast. However, no one did so because they knew very well that ordinary divine beasts could not bear the power of Tianlei. Now that Rong Xiu had done so, roar! Shui was extremely happy as it shuttled through the sea of lightning. Its body flashed with lightning and sparks. However, the crowd quickly realized that this did not have any effect on Shui. Instead, it seemed that its aura was increasing continuously like Dumpling's. It was also devouring the power of Tianlei. After realizing this, many people felt stifled in their chests. It was fine that Rong Xiu was domineering and powerful, but even his contracted divine beast was more capable than other divine beasts. This was really unreasonable. Shui was very proud when it sensed those gazes. It raised its neck and did a 360-degree turn in the air. It was simply too happy. Then it swooped down and came to Rong Xiu. It was rare for it to be so close and docile. Now it finally understood its master's good intentions. What was this small scene to it? Compared to what it had suffered in the Red Moon Desert, it was not worth mentioning at all. Its master was really far-sighted. If it had not gone to the Red Moon Desert a few times before, it would not be able to play around here now. Rong Xiu's lips curled up slightly. Shui Shui seemed to be encouraged. It spun around on the spot and ran away happily. This scene made the crowd want to vomit blood, but there was nothing they could do. They could only stare. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. At a certain moment, a muffled sound was finally heard in the quiet space. Bam! It sounded like something had fallen to the ground. Rong Xiu looked to the side. A middle-aged man fell straight to the ground. Blood kept flowing out of the corner of his mouth. His eyes were tightly shut and his face was pale. He seemed to have fainted. However, he was still holding a short sword tightly in his hands. Streaks of silver light flickered on it. In the next moment, the silver light quickly spread to his entire body. No, a panicked voice came from the side. It seemed that it had a premonition of what was about to happen. Rong Xiu calmly retracted his gaze. Bam! The man's body suddenly exploded. Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 2062. However, there seemed to be an invisible barrier around him, completely surrounding him. His body exploded, but before it could splatter, it had already quickly disappeared. In the blink of an eye, his body had completely disappeared. There was not a single trace of blood on the ground. If they had not seen it with their own eyes, no one would have believed that someone had died in such a short period of time. He did not even have time to cry out in pain or call for help before he had completely disappeared from this world. There were several people in the circle closest to him. At this time they all stopped what they were doing and looked at this scene in a daze. One of them had a scar on his face. His face was as pale as a ghost, and his whole body was trembling. The person who died was his cousin. They had a very good relationship with each other. This time they had specially come together. They did not expect that he would die just like that. Tang Ke's voice faintly sounded. I have already warned you before. Do what you can. If you disregard your own life because of greed and desire to win, then even if you die you can't blame others. You only have one life. All of you, take care of yourselves. In the silent space, this voice sounded particularly cold and indifferent. A layer of coldness swept over and shrouded everyone. That's right. Tang Ke had already said what needed to be said before. That person's death was obviously because he could no longer bear the power of the Tianlei, but he still insisted on continuing to bear it. Who could he blame for not being able to bear it himself? If they wanted to win this fierce competition, if they wanted to become the top refiner, if they wanted to stand in the highest position in the world, who didn't want to? But how could it be so easy? Some people showed hesitation on their faces. In fact, it was already very difficult for them to persevere until now. Many people were already on the verge of collapse. They only needed one last push to end up like that man. Tang Ke said, if anyone wants to give up, just say so. I will let them go. The atmosphere was even more eerily quiet. After a moment, a man suddenly spoke. They give up. The person who spoke was Scarface, whose cousin had died earlier. It was a simple 3 words, but he said it with great difficulty. Even his voice was trembling. His eyes were full of struggle and unwillingness. It could be seen that it was extremely difficult for him to make this decision. However, he was very clear about his own understanding. His strength was slightly inferior to his cousin's. If even his cousin couldn't hold on, then how much better could he be? If even he died, the bloodline of the family would be cut off. Therefore, no matter what, he had to protect his life. Even if he was extremely unwilling to give up, he had no choice but to do so. Tang Ke was not surprised. Survival of the fittest, survival of the fittest, this is the most basic law of the Divine Ruins world. However, knowing how to judge the situation, advancing when it's time to advance and retreating when it's time to retreat is also a smart move. In his words, there seemed to be a hint of approval and consolation. Those who came here were almost all the most outstanding artifact refiners in the Divine Ruins. If even one of them died, it would be a huge loss. Tang Ke only wanted to select the most suitable person to inherit her legacy. She did not intend to kill all of these people. Withdrawing from the competition was an extremely difficult decision. This was especially true for the most prideful weapon refiners. When Scarface heard Tang Ke's words, he took a deep breath and calmed down a lot. Senior Tang Ke, this junior has a presumptuous request. I wonder if you can agree? Speak. Junior. Although I have given up on the competition, I still want to stay here and watch the battle. I wonder if you can agree? Scarface said with some apprehension. However, Tang Ke didn't seem to care about this and laughed heartily. "What's wrong with that? You can just retreat to the entrance." Scarface was immediately excited. He thanked her profusely and stood up to walk over. Although he had withdrawn from the competition, it would be great if he could stay here and continue watching the battle. On one hand, he could broaden his horizons and increase his experience and strength. On the other hand, he could also satisfy his curiosity. Who didn't want to know who would inherit Tang Ke's legacy in the end? Scarface quickly retreated to the entrance and exhaled softly. It could be seen that although he felt a little regretful that he had to withdraw from the competition, being able to protect his life still relieved the pressure in his heart by a lot. With the first person taking the lead, the others quickly followed suit. Not long after, a few more people chose to give up and withdraw from the competition. There were also some people who secretly looked at Chu Luiyue. Among this group of artificers, her strength was the most inconspicuous. Now that 4 or 5 people had already given up, it was reasonable to say that she shouldn't be able to hold on any longer. However, everyone waited and waited, but Chu Luiyue didn't move. She sat cross-legged in her seat and didn't move at all. She calmly looked at the heavenly square cauldron in front of her. The Tianlei was still falling. It was faintly discernible and the speed was even faster. Many people muttered in their hearts. However, with Rongxiu's warning, they restrained themselves and didn't dare to say anything publicly. Thus, everyone could only continue to wait silently. Everyone was very curious. How long could Chu Luiyue last? In the blink of an eye, another 3 days passed. In the middle, 2 people exploded and died because they couldn't control it well. Apart from that, more than 10 people chose to withdraw. One had to know that there were indeed many people who came for Tang Ke's tomb in the beginning. However, after a batch of people died in the stone forest, there weren't many people who came in. Now, a few more people died and more than 10 people withdrew. There were only a few dozen people left in the competition. However, Chu Luiyue still didn't move. She sat there quietly just like on the first day. The Tianlei continued to fall into the heavenly square cauldron. It seemed like she didn't have to worry about anything. If it weren't for the fact that everyone could sense that the origin power around her was indeed being consumed rapidly, they would have thought that she was using some sort of method to cheat. However, it was also because of this that people couldn't understand. Those who were in the competition didn't have time to pay attention to her, but those who were standing at the edge of the entrance were focused on Chu Luiyue. A group of people was discussing something in low voices. I remember that rumor has it that Shangguan is extremely outstanding in cultivation as a martial artist. She can fight against her eminence in the ascended god realm. However, no one has ever mentioned that she has any achievements in the field of weapon refinement. Why does it seem like she's not bad? She's more than not bad. To be able to persist until now, her ability is better than those of us who withdrew from the competition. In my opinion, we've all underestimated her. I heard that she has always been on par with Rongxiu on Lingxiao College's master roll. On the master roll, Rongxiu is number 1 and she is number 2. Moreover, she is Shangguan Jing's junior. Perhaps, she can really amaze the world this time? Remember the mobile version of the website. Chapter 2063. Amaze the world with a single brilliant feat? I don't think that's necessary. Even if she has extremely high talent, how old is she now? At most, she's a high-level craftsman. When some people praised her, there were naturally people who criticized her. After all, there were many people who didn't like Chu Luiyue. I also heard that Rongxiu can already refine a king divine weapon. He has already broken through to become a king craftsman. However, even so, it was still far from enough to take the lead in this competition. After all, there are so many craftsmen venerables present. Shangguan wants to win? I think it's difficult. That's true. Perhaps she's just forcing herself to hold on now? If we wait any longer, she probably won't be able to take it and will choose to give up. This wait lasted for another 3 days. At this time, more than half of the people had been eliminated. Only a dozen people were still persisting. Among these people, 9 of them were craftsmen venerables and 6 were craftsmen kings. Only Chu Luiyue's level was unknown. Yes, even Chu Luiyue didn't know her own strength. That was because she didn't put much effort into crafting. After all this time, she was either the one who was causing trouble for others or she was the one who was causing trouble for others. All her time and effort were used to deal with these things. Hence, she didn't have much experience in crafting. The last time she seriously crafted a divine weapon was when she helped Chang Wanzhou forge the Cloud Sky Copper Sword. After such a long time, she didn't know how strong she was in this aspect. According to her own speculation, she was probably at the level of a high-level craftsman. Of course, this level couldn't be compared to the craftsman kings and craftsman venerables present. However, the key was that the heavenly square cauldron was a divine weapon. Chu Luiyue indeed couldn't directly refine a king divine weapon or a venerable divine weapon like them. She could only try her best to use the heavenly square cauldron to activate the Tianlei. However, this wasn't a foolproof method. Chu Luiyue looked up slightly and glanced at the heavenly square cauldron in front of her. Streams of light flickered, clear and lustrous, sacred and powerful. Even the karmic fire inside was burning more vigorously than before. The heavenly square cauldron was about to reach its limit. Even if the origin power in her body was inexhaustible and her spirit could barely support it, the heavenly square cauldron couldn't hold any more. The heavenly lightning above seemed to have sensed something, and the speed at which it struck gradually slowed down. Some of the silver light that had gathered above Chu Luiyue's head began to disperse. The surrounding people quickly noticed this. A commotion broke out in the crowd. It seems like Shengguan Yu won't be able to hold on for much longer. It's about time. How long has it been? However, to be able to stimulate all the potential of the heavenly square cauldron, he does have some ability. I wonder if she regrets her initial decision? Ayu, do you need my help? Dumpling flew to Chu Luiyue's side and asked crisply. Chu Luiyue gently shook his head. I can't and I don't need to. But, Dumpling pouted angrily. However, those people said that Ayu was going to lose. Chu Luiyue looked up and smiled at her. Don't worry, Dumpling. She suddenly stood up. This was the first time she stood up since the start of the competition. As soon as he moved, he attracted the attention of many people. Even Shengguan Jing and the others who were focused on refining the divine artifact turned their heads to look at her. Tang Ke's voice rang out. Girl, are you going to admit defeat? Everyone held their breaths. Tang Ke didn't ask any questions when so many people had withdrawn from the competition. At this point, Chu Luiyue had just stood up when he spoke. However, everyone knew that Tang Ke had been paying attention to Chu Luiyue since the beginning, so they weren't surprised and waited patiently. Then they saw the girl raise her eyebrows and smile. Why would I? She said slowly. I just wanted to get up and move my body after sitting for a long time. As she said that, she really did turn her waist and move her muscles and bones. Her posture was relaxed and her expression was relaxed. She didn't look like she was under any pressure from the competition. Pretentious. Wei Zhe sneered disdainfully. He didn't believe that she could do anything. Chu Luiyue tilted her head and glanced at Wei Zhe with a faint smile. It seems that the head of the family Wei is really concerned about me. Looking into those clear but dark and indifferent eyes, Wei Zhe's heart skipped a beat and he subconsciously looked away. Then he realized that he didn't look imposing at all. So he turned his head again and wanted to say something to get back at her. You, swoosh. Just as he started to speak, he was interrupted by a sharp and cold sound of something breaking through the air. Something had suddenly appeared in Chu Luiyue's hand and was rapidly unfurling. It was a red scroll that looked like a painting. However, it faintly emitted a suppressive aura that no one dared to underestimate. Wei Zhe was still in a daze when someone in the crowd cried out in surprise. Flowing clouds flying illustration. Wei Zhe widened his eyes and didn't pay attention for a moment before he started coughing violently. Cough, 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 Chu Luiyue asked with concern. What's wrong with the head of the family Wei? Did you choke on something? Wei Zhe's face was red from coughing. When he finally stopped coughing, he was about to defend himself when he saw Chu Luiyue smiling at him with the flowing clouds flying illustration in her hand. The word stuck in his throat couldn't come out. Flowing clouds flying illustration. It was also one of the 10 great divine artifacts. Why was this thing in Chu Luiyue's hands? That's right. This thing was the Nan family's treasure. Previously, the Nan family had suffered a great loss at the hands of Chu Luiyue. Even the head of the Nan family, Nan Yifan, had fallen at the Peach Blossom Cove. Therefore, it wasn't strange that the flowing clouds flying illustration had fallen into Chu Luiyue's hands. During the battle at the Peach Blossom Cove, Chu Luiyue had purposely released the news to intimidate everyone. However, the people outside weren't very clear about the specific situation. Chu Luiyue had specially instructed them not to spread the news about the flowing clouds flying illustration. Therefore, not many people knew about it. Now that she had suddenly taken it out, it naturally caused everyone to be shocked. Countless gazes fell on Chu Luiyue with different emotions. In the Divine Ruins world, even the first-rate families and clans might not have a divine artifact. However, Chu Luiyue alone had 2 of them. How could this not cause people's emotions to surge? Chu Luiyue turned a blind eye to those gazes. She unfolded the flowing clouds flying illustration. then closed her eyes and circulated the force in her body. Boom, boom, boom. The numerous Tianlei above seemed to have been summoned as they descended one after another, heading straight for the flowing clouds flying illustration. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 2064. Seeing this scene, everyone was dumbfounded. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes in satisfaction. The heavenly square cauldron was full, but she had more than one divine artifact. Seeing the smile on Chu Luiyue's face, Wei Zhe instantly understood something. You've already prepared all of this, haven't you? Chu Luiyue nodded without hesitation and smiled. Family Wei leader is really amazing. You can even see through this? Wei Zhe was so angry that his face turned pale and his body trembled. At this very moment, anyone with eyes would be able to see it. Who was she mocking? Just as he was about to say something, Chu Luiyue spoke again. I know that my talent and strength can't be compared to yours. If I want to win this competition, it will be extremely difficult. Fortunately, I've always been lucky and have a few divine artifacts. Perhaps I can use them to fight? Wei Zhe's anger was stuck in his chest and he almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Good luck? A few divine artifacts? Fight with them? What kind of language is this? The treasures that countless families and clans in the world of divine ruins coveted were like cabbages to her. Is there any justice in this world? How is he going to let others live? Ah, right, Family Wei leader also had a divine artifact before, right? As soon as Chu Luiyue finished speaking, a low buzzing sound was heard. Buzz. Rong Xiu stood beside the Thousand Peaks halberd and retracted his hand. It's here. Chu Luiyue shook her head regretfully. It's a pity that it has changed owners. Otherwise, wouldn't it be much easier for Family Wei leader to win this round? You're wrong. Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows and corrected a small mistake. This Thousand Peaks halberd didn't recognize Family Wei leader as its owner before, so it can't be considered a change of owners. Chu Luiyue suddenly understood. Look at me, I actually forgot about this. Family Wei master, I didn't mean to offend you, please forgive me. Wei Zhe had completely lost his temper. He finally understood that these two people were in cahoots with each other. Bickering with them won't give you any advantage at all. He waved his sleeves fiercely and snorted coldly. I hope you can laugh until the end. Controlling the heavenly square cauldron had already consumed a lot of energy. Now Chu Luiyue had summoned the flowing clouds diagram. She really wasn't afraid of death. He wanted to see how long she could hold on. Wei Zhe reluctantly retracted his thoughts and no longer paid any more attention to him. Chu Luiyue was too lazy to continue talking to him. He spread out the flowing cloud flying diagram in front of him and sat cross-legged again. There seemed to be a layer of faint luster on top of the thick ink and heavy color pattern. Streaks of Tianlei, containing an astonishing aura and power, continuously fell into it and quickly disappeared. Chu Luiyue held her breath and focused. For a moment, sparks flew in all directions in front of her. The brilliant and dazzling light reflected the calmness and indifference between her brows. This round, she must win. Chu Luiyue's sudden move stunned everyone present. After a long time, everyone finally realized what had happened. After a difficult mental struggle, they finally accepted all of this. No wonder Chu Luiyue was so confident. It turned out that she had already planned this from the beginning. If one divine artifact wasn't enough, there was another one. Who could withstand this? Even if it were the weapon-refining venerables present, how many of them could go head-to-head with this? The key was that no one could say anything about her actions. After all, those two divine artifacts really did belong to her? Previously, they had tried their best to cancel Dumpling's qualification. They had thought that Chu Luiyue would be helpless from then on. Who would have thought that? And from the beginning, she had already asked clearly that the Tianlei triggered by the divine artifact would be counted in her final result. Tang Ku had said it herself. Who had the guts to refute and question it? Chu Luiyue was so young, but she was so scheming. Everyone had different thoughts, but Chu Luiyue didn't take these to heart at all. She had already given them enough face. If it weren't for the trouble and wanting to teach these people a lesson, she wouldn't have spent so much effort to deal with this competition. Only by defeating them fair and square would she be able to obtain Tang Ku's inheritance without any worries. Another few days passed. One after another, people chose to give up. In the end, there were only 3 people left in the competition. Chu Luiyue, Sheng Guanjing, and Wei Zhe. Sheng Guanjing was recognized as a powerhouse. Everyone expected him to stay until the end. As for the remaining 2 people, they were quite controversial. Chu Luiyue had two holy artifacts on her side. Even though the crowd had different opinions about this, they had to admit that she did have some capabilities. In comparison, Wei Zhe was more surprising. Although he was the head of the family, Wei had a noble status and was quite powerful. Compared to the people present, he wasn't the best. After all this time, there were refining big shots who hadn't come out of seclusion for many years. Normally, when he met these people, he would have to be courteous. But now, those people couldn't take it anymore and chose to withdraw, but Wei Zhe unexpectedly persisted until now. This was a little surprising. Rong Xiu glanced at Wei Zhe and smiled. The head of the family Wei is hiding his strength. Wei Zhe didn't seem to hear him. He was focused on devouring the power of Tianlei around him. There was a purple-black hammer in front of him. The hammer was engraved with ancient patterns, and its aura was restrained and heavy. The power of Tianlei fell on the hammer. He had taken it out at the beginning of the competition. Until now, it had devoured a lot of power of Tianlei, but it didn't change much. It didn't reach a state of saturation like the heavenly square cauldron either. This was interesting. Everyone could tell that the purple-black hammer was a venerable divine artifact. It was very powerful outside, but it wasn't enough here. But now, the amount of power of Tianlei it contained had surpassed the heavenly square cauldron, which was a divine artifact. At first, the people didn't feel that something was wrong, but as time passed, they finally realized that the hammer was indeed unusual. Rong Xiu glanced at it indifferently, and there seemed to be waves surging in his eyes. At this point, Tuanzi came to Rong Xiu's side, tilted its head, and sized up the purplish-black hammer as it muttered softly. She muttered, "Something is wrong with that thing." Rong Xiu looked down at her. "What's wrong?" Dumpling hesitated and said uncertainly, "I don't know. I can't say for sure, but it's just not right. It's like, Rong Xiu smiled. Dumpling couldn't help but ask, "Your Highness, why are you smiling? Aren't you worried that IU will lose?" Rong Xiu raised his eyebrows. He looked lazy, but he was extremely confident. "She will never lose." Mobile users, please browse for a better reading experience from Love Network. Chapter 2065. Dumpling nodded seriously. "Yes. Since IU and His Highness said that we won't lose, we definitely won't lose." As she spoke, she sighed regretfully. "Sigh, it's a pity that Dumpling can't help much in this round." Rong Xiu smiled faintly. "It's good if you can take this opportunity to improve your strength." After all, Dumpling was Chu Liyue's magical beast. If Dumpling's strength improved, it would be a good thing for Chu Liyue. Dumpling was greatly encouraged and clenched her small fists. "His Highness is right. Then I'll go now." Before her voice died away, the small reddish-gold figure disappeared into the vast Tianlei Sea again. Rong Xiu looked up slightly. More than 10 days had passed, but the number of Tianlei in this vast space didn't seem to decrease by much. Clearly they had devoured a lot of Tianlei before, but compared to the vast Tianlei Sea, it was still not worth mentioning. Looking up, they could only see dazzling light and silver light flashing. After all, Tangko had accumulated Tianlei for 10,000 years. Rumble. Suddenly, a series of explosions came one after another. Rong Xiu looked away and saw countless Tianlei striking down at the same time. They went straight for Shangguan Jing. In front of him, the docking jade spirit embryo finally showed the shape of a sword after being polished by countless Tianlei for a long time. A layer of dazzling silver light covered it, making it almost impossible to look directly at it. The powerful pressure that was spreading out from above was still rising. More and more Tianlei landed on it and polished it bit by bit. Even Shangguan Jing's figure was shrouded by the brilliant light, making it difficult to distinguish him. Is Shangguan Jing's divine artifact finally going to be completed? Among the three of them, he is the only one who attracted the heavenly lightning purely by forging a divine weapon. If I remember correctly, the Dark Jade Spirit embryo should have already devoured thousands of heavenly lightning during this period of time. As expected, he's powerful. Such ability really makes people sigh in admiration. Of all of us here, how many can be mentioned in the same breath as him? In my opinion, Shangguan Jing is indeed the best among us when it comes to refining tools. However, he did not know who would have the last laugh in this competition. Shangguan Jing had already reached the final step of forging the divine weapon in his hand. Countless bolts of heavenly lightning came crashing down, completely annihilating the long sword forged from the Dark Jade Spirit embryo. At this moment, the energy in his body was almost completely exhausted. This was the largest amount of Tianlei he had ever triggered in his entire life when he was refining a divine artifact. Not bad. Without a doubt, this was a venerable artifact. Moreover, it was the most powerful existence he could refine in his entire life. The shocking commotion even attracted the attention of Chu Luiyue and Wei Zhe. The two of them also raised their heads and looked over. Chu Luiyue's eyes lit up. This was the first time she had seen Taizu refining a venerable artifact with her own eyes. It was even more shocking than she had imagined. Wei Zhe clenched his fists tightly, and deep jealousy surged from the bottom of his heart. He knew very well that with his talent, even if he cultivated for another 100 years, he would not be able to reach Shangguan Jing's level. Fortunately, he still had his own trump card. It did not matter if he could not compare to Shangguan Jing for the time being. Only the one who could last until the end would be able to obtain Tang Ke's inheritance. Thinking of this, he took a deep look at the purple-black hammer in front of him. Buzz! The sword hummed. Shangguan Jing finally stretched out his hand and gripped the dark jade spirit sword in front of him tightly. In an instant, terrifying sword chi spread out in all directions. It was almost about to cut open space. A gentle yet vigorous energy slowly surged forth, completely surrounding the sword chi. Tang Ke's voice sounded with a smile. This is almost the top level among the venerable artifacts. It's just a little bit away from breaking through the shackles and becoming a divine artifact. Shangguan Jing, you are indeed very outstanding. His words were filled with undisguised praise and admiration. In the current world, there were very few people who could refine a divine artifact of such a standard. Shangguan Jing carefully sized up the long sword in his hand and was very excited. The timing, location, and people were right. To a large extent, he was able to succeed this time because of the power of Tianlei here. Although he did not break through the threshold and truly forge a divine artifact, in fact, Shangguan Jing was already very satisfied. He knew that if he wanted to advance to the next level, it was far from as simple as everyone thought. Otherwise, after Tang Ke and Mr. Su, no one in the Divine Ruins world had successfully refined a divine artifact for 10,000 years. He vaguely sensed that if he wanted to do this he would need some kind of help, but he was not sure what it was exactly. This dark jade spirit sword was the strongest divine artifact that he could refine with all his life's knowledge. He took a deep breath. Thank you, Senior Tang Ke. If it were not for this place, he did not know how much effort he would have to put in to forge this sword. Tang Ke laughed. There's no need to thank me. After all, you're outstanding enough. Do you still want to continue this competition? Shangguan Jing paused for a moment, shook his head, and sighed with a smile. No. The crowd immediately quieted down. They were a little surprised by Shangguan Jing's decision, but they felt that it was reasonable. This sword had already exhausted his strength. Even if he forced himself to continue, it might be meaningless. It was better to end it here. In the last period of time, the dark jade spirit sword had devoured a lot of Tianlei. Compared to the three of them, it was still unknown who would win. Even if Shangguan Jing lost in the end, he had forged such a top venerable divine artifact. This time he had made a huge profit. Okay. Tang Ke did not seem surprised by his choice. Here you have devoured a total of 1,381 Tianlei, and you are currently ranked first. If the two of them can't surpass your number, the winner will be you. This number made many people secretly speechless. If you have the opportunity in the future, it might not be impossible for you to refine a divine artifact. Tang Ke's last sentence immediately made everyone suck in a breath of cold air. Was this an admission that Shangguan Jing had the potential to refine a divine artifact? Shangguan Jing's heart skipped a beat, and then he lowered his head slightly. Thank you for your kind words. Everyone had different expressions, and the way they looked at Shangguan Jing was very different from before. Since Tang Ke had said so, it was basically confirmed. Even if Shangguan Jing did not win this time, the news of what he saw today was enough to shock the world and make them admire him. Shangguan Jing cupped his fists and bowed politely. Then he turned around and walked towards the entrance. Seeing his arrival, everyone couldn't help but feel nervous. Shangguan, congratulations. The few old men who came with Shangguan Jing were the first to react and went forward to congratulate him. The rest of the people hurriedly echoed. Congratulations, Senior Shangguan. Senior has been silent for many years. Now that you're making a move again, it's indeed amazing. Mobile users, please browse and read. A better reading experience comes from the Love Network. Chapter 2066. Everyone's attitude had an obvious change. After Tang Ke and Mr. Su, no one else in the Divine Ruins world had successfully refined a divine weapon in the past 10,000 years. Now Tang Ke had personally said that Shangguan Jing had a chance. This was the first one in 10,000 years. Naturally, it was different. In the past, although Shangguanjing was also famous, there were many weapon-refining venerables in the world, and each of them was very arrogant. No one was willing to lower their heads and admit defeat. Even if they met, they couldn't stand each other. This was also why some people secretly mocked Shangguanjing, Chu Luiyue, and the rest at the start. But it was different now. Tang Ke's words were like gold. From now on, who could be compared with Shangguanjing? The future weapon-refining saint. These few words, just thinking about it, made people feel the pressure increase by several times. If Shangguanjing really succeeded in breaking through in the future, he would be worthy of being the top weapon-refining master. At that time, it wouldn't be so easy to make friends with him. If they didn't seize the opportunity now, how could they have a chance in the future? Everyone was much more polite and respectful to Shangguanjing. They were afraid that he would remember their previous offense. Shangguanjing smiled and cupped his hands. Thank you for your compliments. I'm just lucky. I don't dare to expect anything else. Now, I only hope that you can successfully end this competition. Although he was smiling, he was very polite. His eyes were clear and calm. Obviously, he didn't take the crowd's eagerness and flattery seriously. After that, he raised his eyes and looked at Chu Luiyue, who was still in the field. It was obvious that he was stubborn. Seeing this, everyone could only temporarily dispel the many thoughts in their hearts. Shangguanjing had lived for so many years. He had once been all-powerful and had experienced life and death. What kind of scene had he not seen? Such an old fox was very slippery. At this time it was useless to say anything. The crowd gradually quieted down. No matter what, they could only wait until the competition was over. Now, only Chu Luiyue and Wei Zhe were left in the field, and they were still in the final competition. Above the two of them, Tianlei was continuously gathering and then falling continuously. In the entire space, everyone was silent. Time seemed to pass extremely slowly. At this point, everyone was certain that there was something wrong with the purplish-black hammer in front of Wei Zhe. What was it that could contain more Tianlei than the sacred tool? However, the competition was still ongoing. Since that item was indeed Wei Zhe's, it wasn't considered a violation of the rules. Naturally, everyone could only watch. In the silence, Tang Ke's voice rang out once more. Wei Zhe, 1382. A commotion broke out in the crowd. The amount of Tianlei that Wei Zhe had devoured had already surpassed that of Shangguanjing. This also meant that Shangguanjing was not fated to be first. Some people peeked at Shangguanjing, only to find that he was calm and did not seem to be disappointed. Shangguanjing had a bright future after being praised by Tang Ke. Even if he didn't win this round, it wouldn't affect him much. In fact, Shangguanjing cared more about Chu Luiyue than whether he won or lost. Now he only hoped that she could defeat Wei Zhe. There was something wrong with Wei Zhe's hammer. He didn't know how long it could last. After such a long time, the flowing cloud flying diagram seemed to be almost full. Looking at that calm face, Shangguanjing clenched his fists. 5 days passed in the blink of an eye. The past few days felt like a year to them. However, the winner of the competition hadn't been decided yet. Chu Luiyue had consumed a lot of force and spirit. At this moment, her face was a little pale and her lips were pale. There was a faint bruise under her eyes and she looked really haggard. Wei Zhe's situation seemed to be much better than Chu Luiyue's. After all, he was older and in all aspects of cultivation he was stronger than Chu Luiyue. If this continued, the one who would win in the end would probably be Wei Zhe. At this moment, the speed of Tianlei above the flowing cloud flying diagram had greatly decreased. Obviously, the number of Tianlei that the flowing cloud flying diagram could accommodate had reached its limit. Chu Luiyue stood up again. Wei Zhe turned his head, glanced at her and snorted. What's wrong? Is Master Yu going to stretch your muscles again? The two saint artifacts were already saturated and she herself was obviously exhausted. He didn't believe that she could still come up with any tricks. This sentence was nothing more than sarcasm. However, Chu Luiyue acted as if she didn't understand him and smiled. She smiled and said, Master Family Wei is really prophetic. Nothing can be hidden from your eyes. Wei Zhe choked. Then he saw Chu Luiyue raise her head slightly and ask, May I ask Senior Tang Ke, how much is the difference between me and Master Family Wei? Tang Ke said, Now you are at 1562 and Wei Zhe is at 1895. The difference between the two of them was more than 300. This was definitely not a small number. Especially under the premise that the two of them had such a terrifying number, even if there was only one extra Dao, it was not to be underestimated. How could Chu Luiyue catch up with such a huge difference? She looked like a lamp that had run out of oil. Chu Luiyue thanked him and then lowered her head slightly as if thinking about something. Wei Zhe laughed and pretended to comfort her. Master Yu, actually, It's already extraordinary that you can persevere until now. Now you are still young. In the future you may be able to defeat me. What's the point of winning then? Chu Luiyue raised her eyebrows slightly and interrupted Wei Zhe, who didn't know that today's victory would determine whether they could obtain Tang Ke's inheritance. If they lost today, it would be useless no matter how many times they won in the future. Wei Zhe stroked his beard and laughed. You're right. But who doesn't want to win? But sometimes if you don't have the strength, you shouldn't ask for something that doesn't belong to you. Clang. Before he finished speaking, Chu Luiyue suddenly attacked. A green shadow quickly streaked across the sky and then fiercely struck the ground. Crack. A few cracks spread out in an instant. Wei Zhe looked at it and suddenly opened his eyes in shock. It was a huge green axe. It was heavy, simple, and powerful. Most importantly, it was actually a sacred artifact. Let me introduce, this is one of the 10 great sacred artifacts, the Great Green Sun Axe. It used to belong to Family Yi, but now it belongs to me. Chu Luiyue said casually. Everyone's hearts were instantly set off by stormy waves. Yi Wentao's Great Green Sun Axe. It actually became Chu Luiyue's? It recognized him as its master? Chu Luiyue crossed her arms with one hand and held her chin with the other, muttering softly. This still seems a little slow. Digression, 12:30 p.m., 7th update. Remember the mobile version of the website. Chapter 2067. She looked up and glanced at Wei Zhe. Patriarch Wei, is it convenient for me to ask you something? How much of this hammer of yours have you unleashed? The corner of Wei Zhe's eyes twitched. How could she ask so directly? She's too rude. He gritted his teeth and said coldly, Master Yu, I advise you to stop struggling. Even if you have a third divine artifact, how much strength do you have left? It won't do you any good to hold on and exhaust your body. Chu Luiyue smiled. I know my own body well, so you don't have to worry about it. You just have to answer my question. Wei Zhe frowned. Chu Luiyue blinked. It seems that you don't want to talk about it. But it doesn't matter. After all, we're competitors now. It's normal for you to react this way. Wei Zhe felt suffocated. He shouldn't have asked this question. Why did it sound like he was being stingy when she said it? If that's the case, I can only do my best. Chu Luiyue sighed. Wei Zhe was amused and angry at the same time. What? Did Master Yu hold back before? Chu Luiyue curled her lips and didn't say anything. Instead, she suddenly took 3 steps back. Then, with a thought, a stream of light flew out from the interspatial ring on her hand. A venerable artifact. Someone said in a low voice. The sword she was piercingly cold. What Chu Luiyue summoned was her own red Shao sword. Wei Zhe was stunned at first, but then he couldn't help but laugh. What? Master, you can't summon more divine artifacts now, so you've replaced them with a venerable artifact? However, even if your cultivation as a craftsman isn't high, you should know that there's a huge gap between a venerable artifact and a divine artifact, right? So what if you summon another venerable one artifact? The Scarlet Heaven sword floated in the air. Chu Luiyue flicked his finger, emitting a clear and melodious sword cry. She narrowed her eyes and her red lips curled into a small, playful smile. A venerable one's divine weapon is naturally insignificant in this battle. But who said I would only summon one? Just as she finished speaking, several streams of light gushed out from her palms. Dazzling rays of light appeared one after another and arranged themselves neatly in front of Chu Luiyue in the blink of an eye. Wisps of aura spread out from it. 1, 2, 3, 8? Wei Zhe subconsciously counted again. Every time he called out a number, his eyes widened. As he counted to the end, his voice began to tremble, and his eyes were filled with disbelief. 8 pieces, 8 venerable artifacts. She must be crazy. She had summoned so many at once. Was she planning to use them to trigger Tianlei? She must have a death wish. Not only Wei Zhe but the others who were watching were also in a state of confusion. Some suspected that they had seen wrongly and even counted back and forth a few times. However, there were indeed 8 pieces. The crowd was in an uproar. I remember now. Rumor has it that when they got married, Sheng Guanjing gave her 6 venerable artifacts on the spot. I guess the ones in front of us are those, right? But aren't there 6 of them? Even with her Scarlet Heaven sword, there are only 7. Why is there an extra one? Hearing this, Chu Luiyue turned her head and explained with a smile, There's another one. It's a gift from my father. However, it was originally made by Taizu. The extra one was naturally the Tianling scepter. As soon as she finished speaking, the Tianling scepter flew over and circled Chu Luiyue proudly, swaying back and forth happily. Chu Luiyue tapped it lightly. Don't be so smug. If you don't do a good job later, I won't forgive you. On the Tianling scepter, the dragon's eyes shone brightly. After swaying a few times, it finally obediently returned to line up with the rest. Everyone was speechless. She had already taken the initiative to explain. What else was there to ask? One had to know that apart from the family E and the Nan family, the remaining first-rate families and clans would probably have to empty their pockets even if they could take out 8 venerable artifacts. But now Chu Luiyue had taken out so many on her own. In fact, Chu Luiyue had even more in her hands. After all, she had previously exploited quite a lot from the family E. However, if she summoned too many at once, she was worried that she might not be able to handle it. Moreover, it would be too ostentatious. Therefore she planned to try these first. Of course, at this moment, Chu Luiyue had completely forgotten that she had summoned 3 venerable artifacts. What else could be more ostentatious than this? This should be enough. She let out a long breath. If it wasn't enough, she could just add more later. Wei Zhe was already in a daze. He was speechless. Ever since Chu Luiyue appeared, her every move had far exceeded Wei Zhe's expectations. He really didn't know what was in Chu Luiyue's head. Most importantly, where were her limits and limits? Wei Zhe closed his eyes and finally managed to regain his rationality. Master Yu is really rich and imposing. However, it seems like Master Yu doesn't understand the principle of biting off more than you can chew. In order to win, she was willing to do anything. Wasn't she afraid that she would choke to death? Chu Luiyue stretched her neck and wrists. After sitting for so long without rest or sleep, it would be strange if she wasn't tired. Master Family Wei will soon find out whether I can chew it to death or not. As she spoke, she closed her eyes and waited with bated breath. In the next moment, a turbulent force gushed out of her dantian. Above her, countless Tianlei seemed to have sensed something. They began to feel uneasy and gradually increased their swimming speed. Chu Luiyue shouted. Fall. As soon as she spoke, streaks of silver light struck down one after another. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2068. This time, the number of Tianlei that came crashing down was several times more than before. Sparks flew everywhere and the light was blinding. Even Chu Luiyue's figure was almost shrouded by the white light, and it was difficult to see clearly. The rumbling sounds came one after another, almost causing one's ears to buzz. Wei Zhe looked at the scene in front of him in a daze, and for a moment he actually forgot to move. Chu Luiyue actually summoned so many Tianlei at once? How did she do it? Her force and spirit had already been exhausted to a terrifying extent, and logically speaking, she should be at her limit now. But how did she become even stronger? This time, not only did she use the Great Green Sun Axe, but she also used 8 venerable artifacts. There was indeed a huge gap between a venerable artifact and a holy artifact that was difficult to cross. However, when there were many of them, the accumulated power was also very shocking. At the very least, the number of Tianlei summoned by Chu Luiyue combined was not inferior to the Great Green Sun Axe. If she continued to progress at this speed, it wouldn't be long before the gap between the two of them would be closed. At that time, Wei Zhe might even be overtaken. What the hell? After a while, Wei Zhe came back to his senses and could not help but curse. Originally he was sure to win. Now that he had been tossing around like this, he had consumed a lot of energy. However, no matter what, Chu Luiyue had already continued, and it was useless for him to say anything. Helpless, Wei Zhe could only try his best to calm the anger in his heart and refocus his attention on the purple-black hammer in front of him. However, listening to the continuous movements from Chu Luiyue's side, he could not completely calm down. Every once in a while he could not help but turn his head to look. He had always thought that Chu Luiyue was only using this radical method to win, and that she would not be able to last long. However, a quarter of an hour passed. 2 hours passed. The situation on Chu Luiyue's side was still the same. The gap between the two sides was constantly shrinking. Wei Zhe gradually became impatient. He wanted to control the dark purple hammer in front of him to speed up the devouring of Tianlei, but he knew it was impossible. After all, this thing was not under his control. Thinking of this, Wei Zhe took a deep breath. In any case, there was no time limit for this match. He did not believe that Chu Luiyue could keep doing this. Xue Xue flew back from Tianlei Sea and arrived at Rong Xiu's feet. It stretched and licked its claws before lying down in satisfaction. One could vaguely see a few silver snake-like streams of light flashing across its snow-white fur. The aura around its body was also much stronger than before. It could be seen that after this trip, it had devoured a lot of energy and its strength had greatly increased. I haven't been this happy in a long time. Shui Shui squinted her eyes and started to feel sleepy. Rong Xiu glanced at it. After devouring so much energy in one go, it would take some time for Shui Shui to completely digest it and convert it into its own energy. Rong Xiu raised his wrist slightly, and his slender fingers moved gently in the air. A golden stream of light flew out and quickly formed a small barrier around Shui Shui's body. With the protection of this barrier, Shui Shui could completely block out external disturbances and focus on cultivating. Shui Shui made another sound in its throat, and its icy blue eyes shone. Woo woo woo, I'm so touched. I can finally feel Master's warmth. However, Rong Xiu's next sentence mercilessly dealt it a heavy blow. Your bloodline is not as good as Dumpling's. This is already the limit. Just rest well for the time being. Shui Shui was confused. Master, are you hinting that I'm not as good as Dumpling? Rong Xiu's voice was cold. No, it's clear. Shui Shui was speechless. It knew that it was harder than ascending to the heavens to hear a compliment from Master. Shui Shui looked at Dumpling with resentment. At this moment, she was still running happily in the sea of lightning, as if she would never be tired. Actually, even among ancient divine beasts, there were very few who could be like Dumpling. The Tianlei here contained extremely strong energy. Those who were not strong enough would probably not be able to withstand the raging energy. However, Dumpling did not. She had a pure bloodline and had already opened her fifth meridian. This energy basically could not cause her any harm. She had an extremely strong physical body and great potential. That was why she could move freely in this sea of lightning. Shui Shui hesitated for a long time. Although it did not want to admit it, Dumpling was indeed much stronger than it in this aspect. If you want to win, it's not impossible. Rong Xiu's lips moved slightly. Shui Shui immediately looked up excitedly and met its master's deep eyes. A sense of uneasiness welled up in its heart. The next moment, it heard Rong Xiu say casually, "Just go to the Red Moon Desert a few more times." Ow. I knew it. Shui Shui closed its eyes and decided to play dead. Time passed slowly. The competition between the two had finally reached its climax. Seeing that Wei Zhe and Chu Luiyue were still running, the crowd had complicated expressions. There was really something wrong with these two. Otherwise, they would not have been able to fight until now. Sheng Guanyu is catching up, right? I think it won't be long before she overtakes him. She is indeed very fast now, but Wei Zhe is not to be trifled with. Didn't you notice that from the beginning until now, the speed at which he devoured Tianlei was the same? There was no fluctuation at all? Now that you mention it, it does seem like, TSK, this is not right? No matter what, it can't be so stable. Humph, if there was no problem, he would have been defeated long ago. How could he have lasted until now? I think it's not that he's powerful, but that his hammer is extraordinary. But that's just a venerable artifact. I wonder how he did it. All kinds of discussions could be heard one after another. Sheng Guanjing's gaze kept wandering between the two of them. Every time he looked at Wei Zhe, he would frown. The current situation was that everyone knew that there was something wrong with Wei Zhe's hammer, but they did not know what the problem was. He had been observing for a long time, but he still did not find anything unusual. It was as if his hammer was a bottomless pit. Thinking of this, Sheng Guanjing became even more worried. Although Chu Luiyue had been chasing after him quickly, it had consumed a lot of her energy. What if the competition was still not over after the Great Green Sun Axe and the venerable artifact were full? He could tell that she really wanted to win. At this moment, Wei Zhe suddenly moved. He cut his palm, and a stream of red blood flew out and landed on the purplish-black hammer. For a moment, the wind whistled. Remember the mobile version of the website. Chapter 2069. His sudden action shocked everyone, because it was too sudden. For such a long time, no matter what happened, Wei Zhe had always been very calm. No one expected him to suddenly attack at this time. Could it be that he's anxious because he's about to be caught? Many people guessed. This was also the most reasonable explanation. The warm blood landed on the hammer and was absorbed in the blink of an eye, leaving no trace behind. Then the patterns on it seemed to light up a little. An astonishing aura spread out from it. The Tianlei above seemed to be summoned by some kind of power and began to surge over quickly, gradually forming a silver vortex. And Wei Zhe was at the center. No, to be precise, it was the hammer in front of him. Chu Luiyue also placed a holy artifact in front of her, but the feeling they gave off was very different. On Chu Luiyue's side, everyone could clearly feel that she was the one who activated these holy artifacts and venerable artifacts, attracting the Tianlei. On the other hand, Wei Zhe's side, it was more like the hammer itself was attracting the Tianlei to fall one after another. Wei Zhe's presence seemed to be somewhat dispensable. Wind and thunder rolled. This commotion also alarmed Chu Luiyue. She turned her head and narrowed her eyes dangerously. At this moment, Wei Zhe's condition was very strange. His face was very pale and large beads of sweat fell from his forehead. There was also a trace of blood slowly seeping out from the corner of his mouth, which he quickly wiped away. The aura on his body was also much weaker than before. In the eyes of others, perhaps it was because he had suddenly erupted and used all the power in his body to trigger the Tianlei. However, Chu Luiyue did not think so. Because Wei Zhe's appearance was not purely due to the exhaustion of origin power and spirit. Chu Luiyue's gaze turned slightly and looked at the hammer in front of him thoughtfully. For some reason she felt that Wei Zhe was the one being controlled, family Wei master. Chu Luiyue suddenly opened her mouth and called out to him. Wei Zhe did not seem to hear her and did not react. His eyes were still fixed on the hammer in front of him. Family Wei master? Chu Luiyue's voice rose a little. This time Wei Zhe finally turned his head. Chu Luiyue's heart sank. Wei Zhe's face was as pale as a ghost, and his aura and spirit were very dispirited. Compared to before, he was like a completely different person. Furthermore, all of this was because he had cut open his palm and left a trace of blood on the hammer. What shocked and worried her the most was Wei's eyes. When he first turned his head and looked at her, his eyes were lifeless, as if they were shrouded in a thick layer of fog. Although his expression quickly returned to normal and only a deep fatigue was left in his eyes, Chu Luiyue still felt that something was wrong. Family Wei master, I return all the words you said to me just now. Although the competition is important, your health is the most important thing. Chu Luiyue said word by word. A trace of anger and resentment appeared in Wei Zhe's eyes, but he did not say anything. He only turned his head and ignored her. This time, Chu Luiyue was even more certain of her guess. However, what she did not understand was that if she could sense that something was wrong, then Tang Ke could as well. But why didn't he say anything until now? More and more people from Tianlei flocked to Wei Zhe. Chu Luiyue had finally evened the score with great difficulty. Now that Wei Zhe suddenly made such a move, the gap between them widened again. Seeing the situation change again, the onlookers unconsciously quieted down and waited with bated breath. They could all see that both of them had used their last trump cards. The winner or loser would be revealed soon. Sheng Wanjing slowly clenched his fists. The key to the problem now was not only that Wei Zhe was faster than Chu Luiyue in devouring Tianlei, but more importantly, Wei Zhe had already started to snatch Tianlei. The people from Tianlei who were originally flocking to Chu Luiyue seemed to be attracted by some kind of power on Wei Zhe's side. They all changed their direction and went straight there. On Chu Luiyue's side, the number of people from Tianlei was getting smaller and smaller. Even if she could still hold on, if she couldn't compete with Wei Zhe, the result would be the same. Sheng Wanjing wasn't the only one who noticed this. Many of the blacksmiths who were watching the battle also noticed this. I didn't expect Wei Zhe to be so powerful. He actually managed to snatch Tianlei from Shang Guanyu. If this goes on, he will monopolize the market. When that happens, Shang Guanyu will definitely lose. Usually, when two people fight for Tianlei, one of them has to be much stronger than the other to be able to do so. However, Wei Zhe's strength isn't the best in this aspect. Moreover, Shang Guanyu has several divine artifacts. How can this be? No wonder Wei Zhe was so arrogant just now. It turns out that he has such a powerful trump card. This time he is going to win. Even if Shang Guanyu has a divine artifact, it will be difficult for them to compete with him. All kinds of noises entered her ears. Chu Luiyue retracted her gaze and gently closed her eyes. Of course, she understood what they were talking about. At this moment, the Tianlei was no longer surging toward her. Even the Sun Great Axe and the other weapons were still holding back. If this went on, she naturally couldn't. After pondering for a moment, she raised her hand and with a thought, she recalled all the items in front of her. Soon, there was only emptiness left around her. When the crowd saw this, they subconsciously fell silent. Is she going to admit defeat? Taking drastic measures to deal with the situation. Family Wei is really powerful. Chu Luiyue said. Wei Zhe looked over again with a strange smile on his face. It's not too late to admit defeat. Chu Luiyue smiled and ignored his words. She only clapped her hands, dusted off the dust on her body and looked up. What I hate the most in my life is when people rob me of my things. Her voice was very soft, as if it would be blown away by the wind at any moment. Family Wei, since that's the case, why don't we have a bet and see who will be the winner? Wei Zhe was stunned and immediately frowned. "You're not mine, right?" In the next moment, the woman suddenly tapped the ground with the tip of her foot and flew out like an arrow leaving the bow. She headed straight for the endless sea of lightning. Wonderful Book House. Chapter 2070. This action immediately caused everyone to be greatly shocked. Is she crazy? She actually wants to barge into the Thunder Sea? Those Tianlei contain extremely shocking power. She's really not afraid of death by doing this. Wei Zhe just used his hand to grab it before and was directly burned. She's really bold to rush in rashly. I guess she's unhappy that those Tianlei were forcefully taken away by Wei Zhe? She's indeed quite capable, but she's still young and frivolous. That Thunder Sea is no different from a place of life and death for human cultivators. Does she think that she can freely travel through it like a crimson gold sky phoenix? Obviously, everyone was very pessimistic about Chu Liyue's actions. Some people secretly shook their heads as if they had already seen the result. The few people standing beside Sheng Wanjing couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Sheng Wanjing, are you really not worried at all?" Sheng Wanjing's face was expressionless, and no one could tell what he was thinking at this time. Hearing this, he paused and said, "You never does anything that she's not confident in. Courting death?" He didn't think so. She must have her own reasons for daring to do this. I believe in her. In the eyes of the surrounding people, Sheng Wanjing's words were just stubborn. After all, she was his most beloved junior. How could he really not be worried? This was not Peach Blossom Dock where she could do whatever she wanted. They couldn't see anything from Sheng Wanjing's expression. Some people turned their eyes slightly and looked at Rong Xiu. At this moment he was looking up and his thin scarlet lips were slightly raised. His smooth jawline was raised like a jade carving. There seemed to be waves surging in his phoenix-like eyes that were as deep as the sea. From afar, not only was he not worried at all, he seemed to be quite interested. Needless to say, this person seemed to be more ambitious than Sheng Wanjing. Many people looked at each other. It was probably because Chu Liyue defeated Yi Wentao previously, which made them extremely confident in Chu Liyue, so much so that they even felt that Chu Liyue could easily deal with such a situation. After the initial shock, Wei Zhe quickly regained his senses. His pale and colorless lips were tightly pursed. His eyes were cold, and there was a hint of cold ridicule at the corners of his eyes. Insolence. It was true that she had contracted the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix, but that didn't mean that she had the same amazing physical strength as the Crimson Gold Heavenly Phoenix. In the previous battle with Yi Wentao, it was said that to a large extent, he had relied on the two contracted mythical beasts to achieve victory. As for herself, in the end he was only a high deity. How could a mortal body resist this endless Tianlei? Wei Zhe looked up and sneered, waiting for Chu Liyue to return in defeat. Countless pairs of eyes were also focused on that figure at this moment. Chu Liyue flew into the air and stood in the middle. Countless heavenly lightning bolts slowly drifted across the surroundings. Layers of oppressive might spread out from it, making it hard for everyone to breathe. Chu Liyue's figure was inconspicuous and extremely small here. Her figure was slender and slightly frail. It was as if any bolt of heavenly lightning could easily pierce through her. Chu Liyue took a deep breath and looked at the Tianlei flowing around her. These heavenly thunders would dodge on their own. As long as one didn't take the initiative, one wouldn't be injured. Previously, Wei Zhe's palm was burned when he reached out to touch the Tianlei out of curiosity. After the others present saw that he had learned his lesson, they all acted carefully and the same thing didn't happen again. However, if this continued, these Tianlei would all be snatched away by Wei Zhe. So, she had to come. Chu Liyue made up her mind and reached out. Countless people held their breaths and didn't blink, afraid that they would miss something. Chu Liyue grabbed a Tianlei in her hand. For a moment, sparks flew everywhere. However, just when everyone thought that Chu Liyue was going to be injured, they saw that her expression didn't change and her heart didn't beat faster. It was as if she wasn't affected at all. Then, she exerted force in her hand, and the Tianlei shattered into countless fine streams of light that surged into her body one after another. A Tianlei was crushed and devoured by her bare hands just like that. Everyone was stunned. What's going on? Not only did the Tianlei not cause her any harm, but it also turned into her own power? No. What's that in her hand? Someone in the crowd suddenly shouted. Everyone looked over instinctively and saw that there seemed to be a dazzling light flickering in Chu Liyue's hand. That's a divine body? Wei Zhe suddenly realized something. His eyes widened in shock and his face was full of disbelief. Many people reacted when they heard him say that. That's right. Other than a divine body, what else could help her block that terrifying Tianlei? Upon closer inspection, Chu Liyue's body was indeed covered by a layer of dazzling soft armor. She floated in midair and her body was glowing faintly. She was so small in the sea of lightning, yet so dazzling. She was like a twinkling star that couldn't be ignored. A divine body. There are so many divine bodies in the world. Why don't I have any impression of her? Yeah. I've been looking at her for a while, but I can't remember what kind of divine body she cultivated. Dazzling light, soft armor, this. Wait. Could it be? Someone seemed to have guessed something but felt that it was too ridiculous. He hesitated and didn't dare to say anything. At that moment, Chu Liyue raised her hand again and grabbed at the second Tianlei. Although they had used up a lot of their energy earlier, there were too many Tianlei here. Especially since Chu Liyue was at the center, the density was extremely high. All she needed to do was to reach out her hand, and all the Tianlei would be within her reach. This saved her a lot of trouble. Bang! The second bolt of heavenly lightning shattered in her hand. She was very fast. In a short while, she had dealt with 7 or 8 Tianlei around her. The energy around her had also increased by a lot. Sensing that the force in her body was quickly recovering, Chu Liyue curled her lips slightly. If I knew it would be so convenient, I wouldn't have wasted so much energy before. Using the sacred artifact to activate the Tianlei had consumed a lot of her energy and spirit. Doing it directly could instead replenish her energy. What a loss, what a loss. Fortunately, she had realized it in time. Otherwise, it would have been a huge loss. As she thought of this, she lowered her head and waved at Wei Zhe. Family Wei, thank you. If he had not forced her to this extent, she would not have realized this. As she spoke, she was still holding onto a Tianlei which was shining brightly. Wei Zhe felt a stinging pain in his eyes, his heart, and his entire body. Shengguan Yu. Don't go overboard. Crack. Chu Liyue crushed the Tianlei in her hand and smiled casually. Family Wei, how am I going overboard? Weren't you the one who snatched it from me first? If I had any other choice, I wouldn't have done this, right? Wei Zhe almost spat out a mouthful of blood. So it was all his fault. But no matter what, he was not going overboard, right? This was equivalent to directly plundering the heavenly lightning from the source. Chu Liyue quickly swept through the area. How was this enough? Chu Liyue took a step forward. Almost at the same time, the Tianlei in front of her took a step back. Chu Liyue paused. She raised her eyebrows and smiled faintly. Hey, why are you hiding? Wonderful book room. Chapter 2071. She waved her hand. Come here. The Tianlei in front of her didn't move. There was a hint of coldness in her eyes. I said come here. When the crowd below saw this scene, they were all at a loss. What's Shengguan Yu doing? I think she's greeting the Tianlei? Are you kidding me? It's true. Didn't you see that the Tianlei retreated a little when she went forward? I don't know why, but I feel that the Tianlei are a little afraid of her. Hearing this, everyone's first reaction was that it was ridiculous and unbelievable. They had only heard that people were in awe of the Tianlei. When had they ever heard that the Tianlei were afraid of people? Wasn't this too ridiculous? However, the situation above seemed to be a little strange. Just as everyone was doubting it, they saw a silver snake-like Tianlei move forward hesitantly. Chu Liyue raised her hand and easily grabbed the Tianlei in her hand. Her red lips curled up, revealing a satisfied smile. Be obedient. After she finished speaking, she moved her finger, and the heavenly thunder instantly exploded. It turned into countless tiny streams of light that surged into her body. Continue. She raised her eyebrows slightly and moved her finger. Then, everyone saw a scene that they would never forget in their lives. In the Tianlei Sea, the slender and exquisite woman floated in the air. The Tianlei seemed to be lining up, moving forward one after another and landing in her hand. Then they exploded one after another, and the astonishing power contained in them all surged into her body. In a short period of time, the aura around her had risen rapidly, and it showed no signs of stopping. This scene that was beyond their understanding shocked everyone present. They couldn't recover from their shock for a long time. They couldn't be blamed for making a fuss. This kind of scene was too rare. No matter how hard they racked their brains, they couldn't imagine that when Chu Liyue said snatch, she was really snatching it with her bare hands. Shengguan Jing's tightly clenched hands slowly relaxed, and he secretly let out a long sigh of relief. This girl's trump card was really strong. The corners of Rongxiu's lips curled up slightly as he shook his head helplessly. Even the corners of his eyes carried a doting smile. She was even more playful than Dumpling. In fact, with her strength she could have directly devoured all of these Tianlei. However, she wanted them to line up and step forward one by one. This was obviously done on purpose for the people below to see. Rong Xiu turned to look at Wei Zhe. At this moment he was looking up with a dazed expression. Head of family Wei. Rong Xiu suddenly spoke. Wei Zhe was startled. He turned around to look, the shock in his eyes had yet to fade. Clearly, Chu Liuyue's move had far exceeded his expectations. Rong Xiu raised his chin and said in a low and pleasant voice. You, is about to catch up. Why aren't you moving faster? Wei Zhe's face instantly turned green and white. It was very interesting. Of course he knew this. Did he need others to remind him? Now that Rong Xiu said all this, it was obvious that he was purposely taunting her. Wei Zhe took a deep breath and suppressed the surging emotions in his heart. He said coldly, Head Yu's strength is indeed outstanding. However, I'm a little worried. With Head Yu's current level, if you forcefully devour too many Tianlei, I'm afraid your body won't be able to. Looks like head of family Wei doesn't know. Rong Xiu interrupted him with a smile. Yu's divine body was formed by devouring the God-destroying tribulation. Although these Tianlei are fierce, they should be slightly inferior to the God-destroying tribulation, right? If you have the time to worry about why don't you think about what you're going to do if you lose this round? Wei Zhe's pupils shrank. A trace of deep shock flashed across his eyes. After a short moment of dead silence, gasps of cold air sounded one after another. God-destroying tribulation? Wasn't that something that could only be summoned by a venerable god expert? Furthermore, only those at the very top would be able to achieve this. Those who could successfully pass the God-destroying tribulation were even rarer. In the Divine Ruins world, it had been too long since anyone had summoned the God-destroying tribulation. However, Rong Xiu actually said that not only did Chu Liyue summon it, he even used it as an opportunity to refine his divine body. Many people's first reaction was disbelief. However, Rong Xiu's expression was calm and there was even a smile at the corner of his lips. How did he look like he was lying? Moreover, whether this was true or not, they would know after trying it out. Now that Chu Liyue was in the Sea of Lightning and could easily devour the Tianlei, wasn't it enough to explain everything? Gorgeous soft armor. It's really the God-destroying tribulation. Someone couldn't help but murmur in shock. Most of the people present were the top blacksmiths, so they more or less had some understanding of the God-destroying tribulation. At this moment, looking at Chu Liyue and her performance before and after, what was there to doubt? How powerful was the God-destroying tribulation? Compared to these Tianlei, it was more than just a little bit better. Chu Liyue could even deal with it, let alone these? No wonder she was able to defeat Yi Wentao. With such a divine body, his combat strength is indeed comparable to a venerable god. Naturally, she could easily snatch all of these Tianlei. At this moment, the one who felt the most uncomfortable was Wei Zhe. Chu Liyue's actions were equivalent to directly cutting off his path to Tianlei. As long as a Tianlei wanted to come towards him, Chu Liyue would quickly move and devour it before he could. The key was that she did it directly, simple and fast. Straightforward and efficient. She didn't even give him time to react. In a short while, all of the Tianlei were intercepted, and the sky above Wei Zhe was empty. At this moment, Chu Liyue didn't seem unable to withstand the power of the Tianlei. In fact, she seemed to be in better spirits. She only needed to focus on that battle, and the surrounding Tianlei would continuously fall into her hands and become her power. Wei Zhe's body trembled, and something seemed to be surging wildly in his chest. Finally, he couldn't help but stand up. At this moment, the number of Tianlei that Chu Liyue had devoured had already surpassed his. More importantly, as long as she continued to snatch Tianlei, he wouldn't be able to get a single Tianlei. What was the point of continuing this competition? Seeing his actions, Chu Liyue stopped as well. What, is the head of the family Wei admitting defeat? She asked with a smile. Wei Zhe's throat was filled with a thick stench of blood, but he forced it back down. He spoke with difficulty. You are ruthless. This time you win. He had exhausted all the energy in his body and he couldn't continue. If he forced it, he would probably die here today. He wanted to obtain Tang Ke's inheritance, but he wanted to live even more. Chu Liyue's smile deepened. Head of the family Wei, thank you for letting me win. Wei Zhe didn't want to say another word to Chu Liyue. He reached out his hand, intending to put away the purple-black hammer. However, at this moment, a reddish-gold figure suddenly flew past him and snatched the hammer away. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2072. Wei Zhe was shocked and quickly looked up. The one who did it was none other than Dumpling. Previously she had been wandering around, so Wei Zhe didn't take her seriously. In addition, all his attention was on Chu Luiyue. In a moment of carelessness, Dumpling took advantage of the loophole. At this moment, Dumpling was holding the hammer in her hand and sizing it up seriously. She knocked it with her hand and sniffed it with her nose. Her face was full of curiosity and inquiry. Wei Zhe was scared out of his wits. He immediately pointed at Dumpling and shouted in a trembling voice. "Yo, what are you doing? Hurry up and return this old man's things." Dumpling grinned. "What's the hurry? I just felt that this thing was a little strange and wanted to take a look at it. I'll return it to you later." As she spoke, she looked at the hammer in her hand with a puzzled expression. This thing wasn't heavy. At a glance, it didn't look any different from an ordinary hammer. There seemed to be some patterns engraved on it, but she couldn't understand it. Boom. A cluster of flames burned in Dumpling's hand and quickly surrounded the hammer. Wei Zhe's eyes almost rolled back and he almost fainted. This time he was so angry that he couldn't speak. Shangguan Yu, don't go too far. This crimson gold heavenly phoenix was her contracted fiend. If she hadn't secretly instructed it, this crimson gold heavenly phoenix wouldn't have suddenly attacked. Chu Luiyue finally flew down from the sea of lightning and came to Dumpling's side. She touched Dumpling's round hair bun, then looked up at Wei Zhe and smiled. "Family Wei, why are you so nervous? Dumpling is still a child. It's inevitable that she's curious and wants to play. Don't mind her taking your things. After all, we can't snatch your things in front of so many people, right?" Wei Zhe was furious. Now that the item was in their hands, how could this not be considered robbery? That belongs to this old man. You are already offending him. Shangguan Yu, this old man has already admitted defeat. What else do you want? Chu Luiyue blinked. "Family Wei, you've misunderstood me. I really don't want to do anything. After all, this belongs to you, doesn't it? Dumpling, hurry up and return the things to the family Wei." Dumpling seemed a little regretful when she heard this, but she still nodded obediently. She grabbed the hammer with both hands and handed it over to Chu Luiyue. Chu Luiyue took the item. The flames on it also dissipated, revealing its original appearance. Chu Luiyue looked down and sized him up, raising his eyebrows slightly. The flames of the crimson gold heavenly phoenix were unable to leave any marks on it. It was not even able to detect any abnormalities. This was the most unusual thing. Even the best refined iron in the world would not remain unchanged after being tossed around by Dumpling. Moreover, the material of this hammer was only above average. Dumpling tugged at Chu Luiyue's sleeve. A trace of regret flashed across her grape-like big eyes. There was really something wrong with this item. However, she could not figure out what was going on even after looking at it for a while. Chu Luiyue pinched her little face and then handed her the hammer. "Family Wei, your item?" Wei Zhe was about to step forward when Chu Luiyue suddenly took back the item. He raised his eyebrows and said with a half-smile, "I'm not going to lie to you. To tell you the truth, I'm also very curious about this treasure of yours. Previously, I had used 3 sacred weapons and 8 Dozun stage divine weapons. However, you only relied on this iron hammer to firmly suppress me. This thing of yours is simply more powerful than a sacred weapon." Wei Zhe's heart skipped a beat. "No matter what, that's my business. It has nothing to do with you." "How can it have nothing to do with me? You almost defeated me with this item. I'm just curious. It doesn't seem like a big deal to ask a few more questions, right?" As Chu Luiyue spoke, he held the hammer in his hand and weighed it in his hand. He seemed to be eager to give it a try. "Although the Thousand Peaks halberd did not recognize you as its master, why would you care about those things when you have such a treasure?" Wei Zhe was furious and immediately attacked. A few silver needles flew out. They instantly enveloped Chu Luiyue. The two of them were very close to each other. Wei Zhe's attack came without any warning. Chu Luiyue had just heard the sound of the air being torn apart. When he looked over, he saw that the silver needles had already flown to his eyes. There was no way to avoid them. At this moment, a golden barrier suddenly condensed in front of him. Clang, 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 clang. The silver needles were blocked. After a series of clanging sounds, they were crushed into powder by the terrifying pressure of the barrier before they could fall to the ground. They disappeared in an instant. Wei Zhe sucked in a breath of cold air and looked at the tall figure that had appeared in front of Chu Luiyue out of nowhere. Rong Xiu's strength was already so powerful. "Family Wei clan leader. You attacked without a word. Isn't your temper a little too impatient?" Rong Xiu spoke slowly but his voice was cold. "You're in such a hurry. Are you worried that we will snatch your item in public, or do you have something that can't be seen? As soon as Rong Xiu finished speaking, Wei Zhe was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He retorted harshly. Rong Xiu, don't make irresponsible remarks. Chu Liyue's eyes suddenly focused. Rong Xiu tilted his head. What's wrong? Chu Liyue hesitated for a moment, raised his eyes to look at him and handed the hammer over. Take a look. The aura inside was inexplicably familiar. Wonderful bookhouse. Chapter 2073. Rong Xiu took the item. The moment he touched the hammer, he raised his eyebrows and narrowed his eyes. Seeing his reaction, Chu Liyue was even more certain of his guess. Rong Xiu was silent for a moment, then he looked up. The two of them looked at each other for a moment, and they both knew what the other was thinking. The aura inside, it was very similar. Wei Zhe's eyes were fixed on the two of them, and his back was already drenched in sweat. The two of them were very cunning. Could it be that they had really discovered something? Just as he was feeling extremely nervous, Rong Xiu suddenly walked over with the hammer. Wei Zhe held his breath. Rong Xiu's every step felt like he was stepping on his heart. Soon Rong Xiu stood a step away from Wei Zhe. Then he handed the item over with a relaxed expression and chuckled. Why are you so nervous, family Wei master? I'll return it to you. Wei Zhe looked at him suspiciously. After confirming that he was not joking, he reached out and took the hammer. The moment the item fell into his hands, his heart, which had been hanging in the air, finally settled down. However, Rong Xiu's next sentence immediately made him nervous again. Oh right, I suddenly thought of something. Why haven't I seen family Wei master on the way here? Young family Wei master was Wei Shiping. Back then he had colluded with outsiders to frame Chu Liyue and Rong Xiu, and was expelled from Lingxiao College. Since then Wei Shiping had never appeared again. Now that Rong Xiu suddenly mentioned him, many people did not even realize who he was talking about. Wei Zhe's heart sank. He unconsciously clenched the hammer in his hand and quickly glanced at Rong Xiu. But Rong Xiu's eyes were as deep as the sea, and his expression was calm and indifferent. Nothing could be seen. Wei Zhe said reluctantly, Why are you suddenly asking this? Rong Xiu said, It's nothing. I just thought of him when I saw you. Family Wei master. Can't answer? Wei Zhe paused for a moment. There's nothing hard to answer. He had disappeared ever since he left Lingxiao College. We also know where he is now. Rong Xiu smiled faintly. He's your son. Although he did make a mistake back then, he didn't deserve to die. I didn't expect you to be so heartless. Wei Zhe frowned and said coldly, He did something wrong and disgraced my family Wei. This is what he should bear. How can you talk about being heartless? It seemed that he was still angry at the mention of Wei Shiping. I see. Rong Xiu's face showed a trace of regret. What a pity. I heard that you originally thought highly of him as the successor of the family Wei master. Wei Zhe's face was livid. Obviously he didn't want to talk about it anymore. He turned and left. When he left, he put away the hammer. Rong Xiu looked at his back meaningfully but didn't say anything more. Go. Tang Ke's voice came again. Congratulations, you won. This voice immediately attracted everyone's attention. Chu Liyue raised her head slightly, her red lips curling. Thank you, Senior Tang Ke. Tang Ke said, My inheritance is behind one of the 10 bronze doors. Now you can choose one. If you can choose it, everything will be yours. If you can't, you can only blame yourself for not being fated to be with me. Everyone looked at each other. They thought that after winning this round, Chu Liyue could directly get Tang Ke's inheritance. Who knew that they would have to choose again? Choosing 1 out of 10, the probability was too low. Chu Liyue didn't seem surprised. She smiled and nodded gently. Okay. She knew that Tang Ke wouldn't give everything away so easily, so it was normal for her to set this up. Tang Ke was quite surprised to see her agree so readily. You agreed so readily. Aren't you worried that you'll make the wrong choice and end up with nothing? Chu Liyue shook her head and smiled in relief. I've done all I can. As for whether I'll have this opportunity, it's up to God. No matter what the result is, I have no regrets. Tang Ke paused for a moment, then suddenly laughed. Ha! You're quite interesting, girl. Good. Now I'll clear the field for you. You choose. As soon as she finished speaking, a powerful force swept over and went straight for everyone. Immediately after, they felt as if they were being pulled by something, and everything before their eyes instantly turned dark. Chu Liyue turned around. The huge space became empty and she was the only one left. Oh no, Rong Xiu was also there. Chu Luiyue narrowed her eyes. Tang Ke's voice sounded again. You're Rongxiu, right? Rongxiu raised his eyebrows. Although you didn't participate in the competition just now, the halberd of 10,000 peaks has recognized you as its master. After all, it was made by me personally. For its sake, I'll give you a chance. After this girl chooses, you can also choose once. Rongxiu cupped his fists. Thank you, Senior Tang Ke. Chu Luiyue touched her chin. Tisk. To think that she had worked so hard to get such an opportunity. However, Rongxiu was so easy to get. From the beginning to the end, he didn't seem to have done anything. His luck was really incomparable. Girl, you go first. Chu Luiyue stopped thinking and looked at the 10 doors around her. Every door was exactly the same and she couldn't see any difference. If it were someone else, she would have taken a gamble. Unfortunately, she wasn't. With a thought, the armillary shield appeared in her hand. Clang. The armillary shield fell to the ground and several cracks spread on the ground. At this moment, it seemed that the entire space trembled. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2074. I'm blind. Why don't I let the armillary shield help me choose? As Chu Luiyue spoke, she placed one hand on the armillary shield. She held her breath and focused, injecting a stream of force into it. Buzz. In the next moment, a faint blue stream of light appeared on the armillary shield. The mysterious runes engraved on it also seemed even more mysterious under the illumination of the faint glow. Chu Luiyue waited quietly. However, after a quarter of an hour, the armillary shield did not react at all. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. When she was outside the door, she clearly felt the armillary shield fluctuate. Why was it now? She waited for a while, but there was still no change. The armillary shield did not help her choose. Tang Ke's voice sounded faintly. You're really smart, girl. Unfortunately, although the armillary shield can sense my presence, it can't help you choose. You should do it yourself. Chu Luiyue paused. Her fingers slowly swept across the secret runes on the armillary shield, and a look of deep thought flashed across her eyes. The bronze door knocker had a similar pattern. It was definitely not a coincidence. However, for some reason, the armillary shield seemed to be suppressed by some force here. Although the feeling was very subtle, she could still tell. Tang Ke seemed to not want her to use the armillary shield? Countless thoughts flashed through Chu Luiyue's mind, but her face remained calm. After a short hesitation, she finally raised her head. Okay. Tang Ke asked her to choose, so she would choose. At the same time, outside the tomb, Sheng Wanjing only felt that the world was spinning. After about 15 minutes, the surrounding darkness gradually faded. When his feet stepped on the ground again, Sheng Wanjing heaved a sigh of relief. He immediately looked around and saw a tightly shut door. It was the door that Chu Luiyue had opened and let them in. At this moment, the door was locked. The bronze door knocker shook twice and stopped. Everything seemed to have returned to its original state. All kinds of voices came from behind. It was the group of people who had been sent out at the same time. At this moment, they had all woken up. Everyone looked at each other in dismay and quickly understood. They had been sent back to the stone forest by Tang Ke. Are we out? Why isn't Sheng Wanyu online? She's going to receive Senior Tang Ke's inheritance, so of course she's not here. Didn't Senior Tang Ke say that she was the only one left there? When she came out, the entire Divine Ruins world would probably change, right? This was not an exaggeration. Tang Ke was the undisputed top refiner in the Divine Ruins world. Whoever could inherit his mantle would almost certainly have a successful future. With his favor, Chu Luiyue was very likely to break through and become a refining saint in the future. At that time, her identity would really be different. And the appearance of a weapon refining saint could naturally change the current situation of the entire Divine Ruins. What was more, there was also Sheng Wanjing, who was quite appreciated by Tang Ke, who wasn't extremely envious. Her luck is truly heaven-defying. However, this result was obtained from their competition. She had won fair and square, so the others couldn't say anything. Wei Zhe looked around vigilantly and suddenly realized that something was wrong. Where's Rongxiu? The few people standing beside him were all his followers. When they heard this, they hurriedly looked around. In the end, they couldn't find Rongxiu's figure even after searching for a while. There were only so many people in total. As long as they looked around, they could tell who was there and who wasn't. Furthermore, a person like Rongxiu was too conspicuous. Even if he stood among countless people, he could still be seen with a glance. Patriarch, he really doesn't seem to be here. Wei Zhe suddenly realized something and frowned. He looked at the door and cried out in shock. He was also left inside? The news that Rong Xiu didn't come out with everyone quickly spread. Everyone was filled with doubts. After thinking about it, they could only blame it on the Thousand Peaks halberd. After all, it was a sacred artifact that Tang Ku had personally refined. It was normal that he would look at Rong Xiu differently. After thinking about this, Wei Zhe secretly gritted his teeth and brooded over this matter. The Thousand Peaks halberd belonged to him from the start. If Rong Xiu hadn't suddenly appeared and snatched it away, he would be the one left inside now. Wei Zhe was burning with anger. His blood and qi churned and he spat out a few mouthfuls of blood. Patriarch. The few people beside him hurriedly came to help him. Get lost. Wei Zhe pushed them away with an ugly expression. He found a place to sit down alone and consumed a pill to adjust his breathing and recover from his injuries. He looked down at his palm. The cut from before had already scabbed over, leaving only a faint mark. He gritted his teeth and closed his eyes. Fortunately, I wasn't discovered. Shang Wanjing narrowed his eyes and sized up Wei Zhe. After a while, he retracted his gaze and fell into deep thought. Obviously, there was something wrong with Wei Zhe. Previously, when they were inside, Rong Xiu suddenly asked about Wei Shiping. Obviously, it wasn't a coincidence. At that time, Shang Wanjing had been by Chu Liyue's side, so he also had an impression of this name. Could it be that the secret of the hammer was also related to it? Shang Wanjing rubbed the space between his eyebrows. Now was obviously not a good time to ask. Everything. It was better to wait until Yu and Rong Xiu came out from inside. Silence. Chu Liyue stood in the middle and slowly glanced at the 10 doors. She couldn't tell where Tang Ku's voice came from, and she couldn't be sure which door the fluctuation on the celestial shield had sensed the existence behind. Therefore she could only choose blindly. After a while, Chu Liyue raised her hand and pointed at the door on the left in the middle. Senior Tang Ku, I choose this. Once you make a choice, you can't regret it. I'll ask you again. Are you sure? I'm sure. Tang Ku paused for a moment and suddenly laughed. Good. Since you've made up your mind, then just go forward and push the door open. Chu Liyue composed herself and stepped forward. After taking a step, she suddenly stopped and turned to look at Rong Xiu beside her. She remembered that Tang Ku had said that after she made her choice, Rong Xiu would also have the same chance. She wanted to know which one Rong Xiu had chosen. Why don't you choose first and then we'll set off together? Before Rong Xiu had time to speak, Tang Ku's voice sounded again. No. He can only choose after you go in. Chu Liyue wrinkled her nose. This famous senior Tang Ku was indeed powerful, but there were too many rules. Yes. Although she also knew that the two of them had different choices and it should be difficult for them to meet after going in, she was just a little curious. She didn't expect that even this was not allowed. Rong Xiu laughed and walked over to hold her hand. His slightly calloused fingers gently slid across her palm, causing her to tremble slightly. He wrapped his long arms around her and pulled her into his arms. The light cold fragrance instantly surrounded Chu Liyue. He put his chin on her forehead and rubbed it gently. His voice was low. Don't worry. I'll find you as soon as possible. Chu Liyue nodded subconsciously, then looked up at him and smiled. We've chosen different doors. If you find me, I'm afraid it's not convenient. Anyway, we'll probably come back in the end. Why don't we meet here? There seemed to be a dark light in Rong Xiu's eyes, and his thin scarlet lips curved slightly. Okay. He would never refuse her request. Then I'll go first. Chu Liyue blinked, then turned and walked toward the door she had chosen. This place was spacious and empty. However, after swallowing the Tianlei, she had recovered a lot of her strength, so she was quite fast. In a short while she arrived at the door. Taking a deep breath, she finally raised her hand and placed it on the bronze door. It was cold to the touch, rough and heavy. She exerted a little force. Creak. The door in front of her opened with a creak. A vicissitude and distant aura hit her in the face. It was as if she had opened a dusty box that had been sealed for many years. She could even smell a trace of the ancient smell from it. She focused her eyes and looked inside. It was pitch black. No one knew what was inside. Chu Liyue composed herself and walked inside. Her figure quickly disappeared into the darkness. Bang. The bronze door closed again, completely blocking Rong Xiu's line of sight. The spacious space fell into silence again. Rong Xiu stared at the door for a while, then looked away. At this moment, the gentleness and affection in his eyes had completely disappeared. It was replaced by the usual coldness and solemnity. It was as if the mountains and rivers had frozen over 1,000 miles, and the cold air was awe-inspiring. The surrounding temperature seemed to have dropped a lot. After a while, his thin lips opened slightly. Tang Ku. You're presumptuous. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2075. His voice was cold and low like jade hitting each other, but it was also wrapped in an extremely terrifying pressure. As soon as he finished speaking, the ground under his feet was covered with a faint layer of white frost. A gust of wind swept over with cold air. Then a translucent phantom appeared in front of Rong Xiu. It was a man who looked to be in his 30s, wearing a blue robe. He was tall and straight, and his handsome face could be vaguely seen. Was Tang Ku. If they did not see it with their own eyes, they would find it hard to believe that the legendary Tang Ku was so young. In fact, because of his outstanding talent, he had broken through the shackles long ago and became a supreme god expert. As a result, he maintained his figure and appearance from then on. Seeing that Rong Xiu was angry, a trace of deep fear flashed in his eyes. Then he clasped his hands and bowed respectfully to Rong Xiu. I acted without authorization and led Master Yu into the wind separation cave. I hope your highness can forgive me. Rong Xiu looked at him coldly. Yes, madam. Tang Ku suddenly came back to his senses and quickly bowed his head. I misspoke. I almost forgot that your highness is now married. Rong Xiu took a step forward. The increasingly heavy pressure was almost unbearable for Tang Ku. Rong Xiu said coldly. No matter which of these 10 doors she chooses, it will lead to the wind separation cave in the end. You want her to help you save people? But do you know how dangerous it is for her? The question made Tang Ku's heart tremble violently. He gritted his teeth, lifted his clothes, and directly knelt down. Your highness, this subordinate understands all of what you've said. But I have no choice. 10,000 years have passed. I can't wait any longer. Even if he knew that doing so would make his highness angry, he had to do it. This was his only chance. Rong Xiu looked at him condescendingly. Tang Ku's head was on the ground and her hands were on the ground. She was almost unable to stand up because of this aura. After a long time, Rong Xiu turned around and walked towards the door that Chu Luiyue had just entered. Sensing the commotion, Tang Ku hurriedly dissuaded him. Your highness, you can't go to the wind separation cave now. Rong Xiu stopped in his tracks. He naturally knew this. If he forced his way in now, the situation would only worsen. I will wait here. Rong Xiu stood in front of the door with one hand behind his back and a gloomy expression on his face. If she returns unharmed, I will let bygones be bygones. But if she is hurt, Tang Ku, your 10,000 years of waiting will be in vain. Tang Ku's heart trembled, and then she let out a long breath, closed her eyes and kowtowed sincerely. Thank you, your highness. Chu Luiyue was naturally unaware of the situation outside. After entering the bronze door, after a short period of darkness, there was a ray of light in front of her. Chu Luiyue calmed down and walked forward. After walking through a narrow passage, she found that there was a silver barrier at the end. As for the faint glow, it was coming from the barrier. Chu Luiyue looked carefully. The pressure on this barrier was extremely strong, but it didn't seem dangerous. She hesitated and stretched out her hand, but was surprised to find that her hand easily passed through the barrier. Chu Luiyue widened her eyes in surprise. She had never encountered such a situation before. After hesitating for a moment, she walked forward. As expected, her whole body passed through easily. Just as she was full of doubts, she was shocked by the scene in front of her. Behind the barrier was a completely different world. Looking ahead, it was a flat and wide field. Under the vast sky, 2 tombstones stood quietly. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2076. Loneliness, loneliness, and bleakness. These were the emotions that surged into Chu Luiyue's heart when she saw the 2 tombstones. Apart from these 2 tombstones, there was nothing else in the entire field. It was as if they had been standing here since an extremely long time ago. As if driven by some force, Chu Luiyue stepped forward. She frowned as soon as she took a step. In this place he couldn't fly. This place was clearly not a normal natural world, but a unique small space. "Ayu, do you want me to bring you there?" Dumpling's voice came from her heart. Chu Luiyue shook her head. No need. Even she was greatly suppressed, so Tuanzi might not be spared either. Anyway, there was nothing to be anxious about. She might as well walk over slowly. She suddenly thought of something and looked back. That silver barrier was like a flame, quickly burning away. In an instant the void was empty. At this moment she had completely entered this strange small space. Chu Luiyue pursed her lips and walked toward the 2 tombstones. Although she could not fly, she had already tempered her divine body, so her speed was not slow. About 2 hours later she finally arrived in front of the two tombstones. The tombstones were carved from white jade and were about the height of a person. Probably because they had been through too much wind, frost and rain, there were already traces of time on them. The words on the tombstones were already a little blurry, but if one looked carefully they could still be distinguished. The strange thing was that only one of the two tombstones had words on it. Chu Luiyue looked to her right. There was a line of words carved on the tombstone. Tang Ku's tomb. Chu Luiyue frowned slightly. Although the outside world had always said that Tang Ku was dead, and even before they came in, they had always thought that this was Tang Ku's tomb. But in fact, Tang Ku clearly still had a soul left. He was not dead at all. Then who set up this tombstone? Other than Tang Ku there should be no one else here. Could it be that he carved it himself? Chu Luiyue felt a burst of absurdity and disbelief at the thought that came to his mind. However, other than this answer, no other explanation seemed to make sense. She looked at the tombstone on the left. The surface was smooth and flat, and there were no words carved on it. The nameless tomb? Chu Luiyue rested his chin on his hand and fell into deep thought. To be able to stand side by side with Tang Ku's tomb, the person buried under this tombstone was naturally not an ordinary person. But why was there no name on it? Was it because the person who set up the monument didn't know who this person was, or this person's name couldn't appear on it? Chu Luiyue carefully recalled Tang Ku's life. Back then he had left the Tang clan alone. After he disappeared without a trace, the people of the Tang family were quickly exterminated. It was unlikely that the person below was anyone else from the Tang family. Who could it be? Tang Ku could summon the wind and summon the rain. It was hard to imagine what kind of person he would allow to be buried with him. Chu Luiyue didn't think that Tang Ku didn't know the situation here. Did he let me in on purpose? Chu Luiyue had a lot of questions in her mind. She stared at the nameless tombstone and fell into deep thought. Suddenly, a name appeared in her mind. Wait a minute. Back then, there was indeed a person who disappeared almost at the same time as Tang Ku. It was that person, Mr. Su. Just as this thought flashed through her mind, Chu Luiyue's eyes flashed. Those sacred artifacts actually flew out and landed in front of the nameless tombstone. Wonderful book house. Chapter 2077. A ray of light flew out of the heavenly square cauldron and landed on the tombstone. It was as if the intense darkness was suddenly torn apart by the light. Something gradually appeared on the tombstone. Chu Luiyue's eyebrows moved slightly. Then the flowing cloud flying diagram and the great azure sun axe appeared. The three rays of light converged. A mysterious rune was revealed bit by bit. Chu Luiyue looked at it. These runes were somewhat familiar. She seemed to have seen them on the armillary shield. In order to confirm her thoughts, she summoned the armillary shield and carefully examined it. Indeed, these runes were exactly the same as the one on the armillary shield. However, the runes engraved on the tombstone were only half of those on the armillary shield. Moreover, these runes seemed to be sealed by something. After the light of the three divine artifacts surged, only a part of them was lit up. The rest of the runes were dark and could not be seen clearly. Could it be that 5 divine artifacts were required to be here at the same time to reveal their original appearance? Chu Luiyue crossed her arms and fell into deep thought. However, the reaction of the 3 divine artifacts was enough to prove that this was very likely Mr. Su's tomb. The two of them were buried in the same place. Chu Luiyue took a deep breath. Her heart was still surging with waves. The world only knew that the two of them had a shocking battle back then. After the battle ended in a draw, they disappeared without a trace. Who would have thought that their tombstones were erected together? Tang Ku asked her to come in. Could it be related to Mr. Su? After all, she had 3 divine artifacts made by Mr. Su. Suddenly, a fluctuation appeared on the armillary shield. Then, a faint glow overflowed from it and covered half of it. Chu Luiyue was very familiar with this feeling. In the beginning, when she was outside and before she came in, the armillary shield had shown a similar reaction. So, it was not Tang Ku's summon but Mr. Su's tomb? After that, Chu Luiyue subconsciously raised her hand and reached forward. Her palm gently covered the runes. Thump, thump, thump. The sound of a heartbeat came from the tombstone. Chu Luiyue was shocked. This heartbeat was not hers. Just as she was about to retreat, she suddenly saw that under her palm, there was a sudden burst of light. Almost at the same time, the force in her body began to surge toward the tombstone at an astonishing speed. Not good. Chu Luiyue sensed that something was amiss and immediately increased his strength. However, he was shocked to find that he could no longer withdraw his hand from the tombstone. There seemed to be something inside that was madly devouring her origin power. As for her body, it was as if it was being suppressed by an invisible force. She was unable to move. Bang bang. The sound of his heartbeat became clearer and clearer. Chu Luiyue could feel the force in his body rapidly depleting. She frowned. Fortunately, she had stored an extremely shocking amount of origin power within her dantian. Otherwise, just this short consumption would have been enough to overdraft her. Ayu. Sensing that something was wrong, Dumpling also jumped out. Seeing Chu Luiyue's frown, Dumpling was also very anxious. She and Chu Luiyue were bound by a life contract, so she knew very well that Chu Luiyue's energy was being devoured at a frightening speed. Ayu, let me help you. Dumpling was about to step forward, but Chu Luiyue immediately stopped her in her tracks. Stop right there. Don't come over. The aura within the tombstone was extremely powerful. More importantly, it was clearly coming for her. Even Dumpling would not be of much help. If she was not careful, she might even implicate Dumpling. Dumpling heard this and instinctively stood rooted to the ground. However, seeing Chu Luiyue's rapidly pale face, her heart also clenched. Her grape-like eyes were instantly covered by a layer of mist. Ayu, Chu Luiyue took a deep breath. Zichen. As soon as she finished speaking, a black figure flashed in front of her. Zichen also responded to the summons. Chu Luiyue said, "Help me look after Dumpling." Zichen nodded. Yes. After speaking, he was about to move when he saw fine beads of sweat continuously appearing on Chu Luiyue's forehead. A rare hint of hesitation appeared on his cold and indifferent face. Master, do you really not need help? Looking at her like this really made him feel uneasy. Chu Luiyue forced a smile. Don't worry, I know what I'm doing. The reason why she asked Zichen and Dumpling to temporarily retreat was that even she felt that the situation was too dangerous. If something happened, the three of them would be directly wiped out. Therefore, after careful consideration, this was the most appropriate choice. Zichen instantly understood her thoughts. He pursed his thin lips and nodded. Zichen will not disappoint you. Master, please be careful. After speaking, he moved and came to Dumpling's side. At this moment, Dumpling was about to step forward barefooted. Before she could take 2 steps, Zichen blocked her way. Master, you mean to wait and see? Zichen lowered his head and looked at the little one in front of him. His voice was as cold as usual. Dumpling's line of sight was blocked by 2 long legs. When she heard this, she raised her head and put her hands on her waist indignantly. But now Ayu is in danger. I want to go. She snorted indignantly and changed direction. She walked around Zichen with her short legs intending to rush over. As she walked, she muttered, I'm the young master of the Crimson Gold Sky Phoenix clan, and I've already opened my 5th meridian. I can definitely help Ayu. Even if I can't, I can call Grandpa clan leader and the others. Before she finished speaking, her body suddenly flew into the air. It was actually Zichen who had directly scooped her up. Whatever she says is the truth. Dumpling's small body was easily locked in his arms. She began to struggle with all her might. Let go of me. I want to go over. However, her small body was not worth mentioning in front of Zichen. Although her strength had increased greatly, Zichen was not to be trifled with. After all, behind Zichen stood the great Phoenix Dragon Clan's clan leader, Mao Zhen. The current Dumpling was still very young compared to her. Seeing that Dumpling was unwilling to give up, Zichen narrowed his eyes and said coldly, If you're not afraid of delaying her, go ahead. As soon as he said that, Tuanzi finally calmed down. She was just worried about Ayu. After thinking for a long time, she looked up at Zichen. Are you saying that Ayu will really be fine? Zichen raised his chin. You just have to watch for yourself. He was also her contracted magical beast, and his worries were no less than Dumpling's. But he knew that Chu Luiyue did not need their help at this time. That tombstone, from the beginning it was targeted at her. Time passed slowly. Chu Luiyue's face was pale. Her vision turned black. This was a sign of exhaustion. She closed her eyes. Wonderful book house. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.